Hi everyone. Recently I conducted a class for some local filmmakers on recording sound for film. The class was intended to be the bare minimum that you need to know in order to be able to record sound on a film set. I recorded the class and here it is. The video is about 4 hours long, so set aside some time or figure out how to bookmark your progress as you work your way through. Ironically, I had some trouble with the sound as I was recording this, so I'll explain that more at the end of this video, but be prepared for the sound to change as I went from the mic that I liked to the mic that still worked. All right, everyone, so welcome to Introduction to Sound Recording Sound for Film, or as Jeff likes to call it, School of Sound.
SOS.
Yeah. If you haven't caught on, Jeff likes to rip things off. All right, so these are the basic things that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start off with a little bit of fundamentals of sound physics, basically. Not a lot, not everything there is to know about sound, but just what you need to know for this. I'm going to have a conversation about minimum recommended equipment because I run into a lot of people who've bought stuff that I feel like they've probably wasted their money on, and they're gonna have to get something different in order to get good results. And then we're going to get into the actual recording stuff. We're going to talk about microphone placement, which is really probably the most important choice in recording sound for film. We're going to talk specifically about booming, and then we're going to talk some about the kinds of things that you need to do on a set to communicate with the director or the AD or whoever's in charge of you, to make sure that there's good communication about what's going on, so that any mistakes can get corrected or whatever. All right, so I tried to make a really cool After Effects animation for this, but it was too complicated for After Effects. So sound basically is vibrations of air molecules. The air molecules move forward and backward away from a sound source because that sound source creates momentary high and low pressure, and that high and low pressure ripples out like a wave from the source. And if it is repeating, oscillating, then our ears can hear it. If it's just like one wave, we're probably not going to hear it. We might hear a pop because it echoes off the walls, but the way our ears work, we hear oscillations, we hear continuous sound, or continuous waves. So, oh, by the way, if this is buzzing, I promise you this is not moving. Especially if you look like right here. What are we installing updates for? Where's my mouse? Okay, that's awesome. So, the sound pressure starts at the source, and that pushes on the air molecules next to it, which push on the air molecules in front of that, and it's a cascading, rippling wave effect, just like when you drop a pebble in a still water and it ripples out in waves. Sound does the same thing, and it travels through the air at the speed of sound, and when it reaches our ear, that the changes in air pressure push and pull on our eardrum, and that movement is linked to our inner ear, which I'm not going to get into, but we hear it because the air pressure moves our eardrum. Okay, so you've probably seen a lot of graphs about sound and sound waves that look a lot like this. When I was a kid, I saw things like that, and I assumed that meant that the sound squiggled through the air. It doesn't. That's a graphical representation of the changes in air pressure, high air pressure and low air pressure over a period of time. So this is important. The higher the air pressure, the louder the sound seems. And the word for that is amplitude, but you might call it loud or volume or whatever. But so the stronger the air pressure is, the louder the signal is, the louder the sound is. We're going to get into signals later. There's a unit of measure for measuring the amplitude of a sound signal, whether it's in the air or whether it's electrical, and that is decibels. I'm not going to talk a lot about decibels today, but that's the unit of measure. We're going to spend some time on this one. We're going to come back to this one again too. So the inverse square law, this is an important thing, and you're going to see later why it's important. But so if you imagine a sound source here, it's pushing on air around it, and that rippling effect that spreads out away from the source is actually spreading out in a sphere. So the farther it travels, the bigger the sphere is, the more surface area that the sphere is. So the original energy that created the sound is getting spread out over a larger and larger area of the surface area of that sphere. And so that kind of dilutes the power of the original sound. So this formula here is more or less the formula for calculating the surface area of a sphere. So it works out to show that when you move, say, some amount of distance, they're calling it r, away from the source, you've got, a section of that sphere's surface that represents the amount of surface area that sound has been dissipated across. But if you go twice that far, you actually have 4 times as much surface area. And if you go 3 times that far, you have 9 times as much surface area. So what's happening here is as your distance increases, the surface area is the square of the distance. And you've got the same amount of power, but it's spread out over more and more surface area. And so that diminishes the amplitude, the loudness of the sound by the square of the distance. So the inverse square law means that the strength of the sound is divided by the square of the distance. So if I'm here, my loudness might be, let's just pick a number like 100. If I get out here, my loudness isn't going to be half that, it's going to be a quarter of that. And when it's out here, it's going to be a ninth of that. And so the distance, we're going to talk later about how this is useful, but basically the distance between the source and the receiver, either microphone or your ear, really makes a dramatic difference. So it goes into microphone placement, basically. So do I need to explain any of this again? I don't know. It's kind of a hard thing to explain, and I don't know that I did it very well.
I like when you use straight up numbers. So if it's twice as loud as I need or something, I have to move, or 4 feet. Let me think about it. So
well, with sound, you're not really going to move in order to get something. And I'm going to explain later what you will be doing. But what you just said does count for light. if you're adjusting a light, this inverse square law also applies to light. So if your subject is too lit, you're going to move your light back, and the inverse square law has to do with how far you're going to move that light and how much of effect it has reducing the light that actually hits the subject. But so the same thing is with the microphone. If I might as well jump to it, but if I have a room with background noise and reflections off the wall, and I'm recording, if I try to record that from the camera's location, which is pretty far, my voice is competing with all the background sound. But if I put a mic right up close to me, the background sound hasn't changed, but now my voice is way, way louder at that microphone. And so now there's no competition. The background noise is there, but it's so quiet relative to my voice that it's very good. So when you were talking about numbers, so if
it's like if you're at the source and you want it to be twice as quiet.
If I want okay, that's a good example. If I'm here and I want, if I'm measuring here and I want my background noise to be twice as quiet, I can move half the distance to the source, and the background noise doesn't really change, but my voice is 4 times as loud. Oh, you wanted twice, but
Yeah,
okay, so twice would be 1.414, the square root of 2.
Right.
So you would move from there to there, right?
Right.
And then what you can do is, now that my voice is twice as loud, is you can turn down my gain to half of what it was, and my voice is back down to what it was a minute ago, but now the background noise is half of what it was. We're going to visit this again, so. All right, so microphones. So the job of a microphone, it seems pretty obvious, but in a technical sense, what the microphone is doing is converting sound energy into electrical energy. So the energy that created this rippling sound wave through the air, and the amount of energy that exists wherever the microphone is, that energy is able to move a microphone diaphragm or your eardrum or whatever. That's energy. And the microphone converts that into electrical energy. There's a word for that, which is a transducer. A microphone is a transducer because a transducer converts one kind of energy into another kind of energy. So all microphones have a diaphragm, some kind of a flat, think of it as like a piece of aluminum foil or something like that, and the sound waves move that in and out just like it would on your eardrum. And then different kinds of microphones have different strategies of how they convert that movement into energy, into electrical energy. So we're going to talk about a dynamic microphone first, which is, in a sense, kind of a waste because in film we almost never use dynamic microphones. Dynamic microphones are very common on stage because they're much more durable and musicians throw them around and stuff. And this is the original kind of microphone. The first microphone was a dynamic microphone. So the way this works is that you have a diaphragm right here. It's showing it from the side, but it's probably a round disc. And then there, attached to the back of the diaphragm is a coil, just a coil of wire. And that's what the leads from the microphone are connected to. And then in a fixed position, this doesn't move with the diaphragm, there's a magnet. And so when the diaphragm moves in and out, which it does because the sound waves are pushing and pulling on it, that moves the coil, and the coil moves back and forth across the magnet, and that generates electricity the way a generator does, or I don't know, you guys have you've probably seen experiments for electromagnets. It's the opposite of an electromagnet. Instead of putting voltage in to get a physical movement out of it, it's the other way around. The physical movement is creating electricity within the wires, within the coil. This is an electrical property called induction, which I'm not going to explain today. But so the result is the coil moving back and forth across the magnet causes electricity to move in the wires in that coil, and so the wires from that coil are connected to essentially the output of the microphone. In reality, there's probably a preamplifier or something like that, but that's really the gist of it. And so the louder the sound, the more movement there is, the farther and faster it moves the magnet, so the more electrical signal is produced. And the electrical signal is positive for a bit as the coil moves one way, and then it's negative for a bit as the coil moves the other way. A condenser microphone works differently. And the condenser microphone is the kind of microphone that you're gonna have almost all the time in filmmaking applications. A shotgun microphone, a lavalier microphone, those things are all going to be condenser microphones. Mainly it's because they produce a much more accurate sound. So the way the condenser microphone works, it has a diaphragm just like the condenser microphone, but instead of having a coil attached to it, there's another plate behind the diaphragm, and this is called the charge plate, or they're calling it a back plate here. So this type of microphone requires power to be applied to it. So the power that's given to the microphone charges this plate, and so there's a bunch of electrons sitting there, and then as the diaphragm moves, it gets closer or farther away from that plate, and there's capacitance between the diaphragm and the charge plate, and that capacitance changes as it moves back and forth. The farther away it is, I think that means there's more capacitance. I'm not quite sure about that. It might actually say here. But in any case, as the capacitance changes, it requires charging or discharging. If the capacitance decreases, then it will discharge, which means it pushes electricity out. And when the capacitance increases, then it charges, which means it pulls electricity in. So that pushing and pulling of electricity is how we get an electrical signal generated from the physical movement of the diaphragm. So just like with the other microphone, the connection comes out from here to the output. What is my other thing? Okay, so condenser microphone is the main consideration that we need to know about it is that it requires power. So there has to be some way to get power to it. You could buy microphones that have a little space to put a battery in it. The most common strategy is to use something called phantom power, which basically is just power provided over the XLR connection. And if you're not using an XLR, if you're using one of those little 1/8" jack microphones, which is a consumer type of microphone jack, there's something called plug-in power, it's different from phantom power, but it results in the same thing. It gets power to the microphone. All right, so directionality. I'm going to use a prop here. So you guys have probably all heard of shotgun microphones. A shotgun microphone is called that because A, it's very directional, and B, it's long and it looks like a shotgun. So what that means is not that it reaches out farther, although people often use the term reach for when they talk about microphones like this. And it doesn't make the sound in front of it louder. What it really does is it rejects the sound coming from other directions. So if I point this at Jeff and Jeff's talking, his voice is coming toward the microphone, and when it gets here, it's picked up by the sensor, by the diaphragm in the microphone. But if I turn this sideways, his voice comes in this way, and it comes in this way, and it cancels it. It cancels out. I don't want to get too much into how shotgun microphones work, but the bottom line is that the sensitivity of the microphone is full on this direction, and as sound sources are farther and farther away from the axis, there's more and more rejection, and that's very useful for filmmaking, because if I'm in a room with reverbing walls, or if I'm outside and there's noises outside, the sounds that are coming in from the side or the rear are greatly reduced. They're not completely eliminated, but they are what they call attenuated. It's reduced quite a bit, and so it basically focuses on the sound sources that are in the direction that it's pointing, and it rejects the sounds that are coming off axis.
So would that have been helpful on the 40-hour film project? You had the planes and lawnmowers.
It was helpful. This is the microphone that we used. It was inside that windscreen, which we're going to talk about. But it would have been way worse if I'd had to use what's called an omnidirectional microphone, which means it picks up everything in every direction.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be wrong here, but I've been told that it rejects off-axis sound except straight out in front of it where you're pointing it and straight behind it.
Yep. Shotgun microphones are peculiar in that they have a little, what they call a lobe in its pattern at the rear. So it actually doesn't do very good rejection from behind it. And
that's where the planes usually are.
Yeah. So I'm not going to get into a lot about shotgun microphones today, but every microphone, I shouldn't say every, but most of the microphones that you're going to use as a filmmaker are going to be directional to some extent. So this is the microphone that I use indoors. It's not a shotgun microphone, but it is still very directional. So it's picking up sounds in front of it much more strongly than the sounds that come in from the side. And again, it's not that it picks it up better, it's that it rejects the sounds that are coming from the sides.
So those huge microphones for like police stuff, and they point
The
at-
disc?
Yeah.
Well, that's very directional. It uses a different principle. It's a parabolic dish, which is totally outside the scope of this conversation. But
All right, never mind.
but I can explain that to you sometime if you want.
Okay.
So I don't really have a very good drawing. I don't know why I didn't put it on here, but I don't have a very good drawing of how these rejection patterns are normally shown when you look through the literature of a microphone. But normally they're depicted from the side. So if the microphone is, say, upright like this, then it'll be a graph that shows a circle, and the closer the line is to the microphone, basically it's suggesting how much rejection it is from that direction. And what you end up with is a shape that's sort of heart-shaped, and that's why a directional microphone is called a cardioid microphone. Cardioid is related to the word for heart. So cardioid, supercardioid, and hypercardioid are just examples of even more directionality, more off-axis rejection. And then a shotgun is kind of the most off-axis rejection. Oh, I should be asking. You guys have any questions at this point? I mean, you've been asking, so. All right. All right, so now we're going to come up to an important concept here. So far I've been talking about analog stuff, the actual air pressure moving through the air is an analog concept. When it gets converted to an electrical signal, that's an analog electrical signal. But we live in the 21st century, and so when we record things, we are recording them digitally. And this is a huge benefit because we basically don't ever get any additional noise introduced into the signal chain later. But that means that we, as location sound recorders, have to take care to make sure that that signal gets recorded correctly the first time, at the time that we're recording it. So in an analog signal, you've got electricity moving through the wire, either positive or negative electricity, and it alternates back and forth with the shape of the sound waves. In a digital signal, instead of having varying electrical voltage, you have numbers. So the analog to digital converter of your recorder is looking at the voltage that's coming from the microphone, and it assigns it a number. And then it stores that number. That number is what actually gets recorded. And so I don't know how well you can see this on this graph, but basically, I mean, you know how photographs are pixelated, and it's the same kind of concept, only with sound. And so the number is, by definition, it's an approximation of what the actual voltage is. But if you have, a big enough range of numbers, you can be pretty precise. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. Okay, so you guys all know what an integer is. An integer is a number that doesn't have any fractional part, no decimal, nothing. It's just a number, 1, 2, 3, nothing in between. In computer and data technology, we use bits to store numbers. And so if we have 16 bits, that means we have 16 ones and zeros. And if you combine those together, that means you have 2 to the 16th power possible combinations. So that's about 64,000 possible combinations, but we need half of them to be negative numbers. So with a 16-bit value for that sample, we can have plus or minus 32,767. But if we increase the number of bits that we have to store, we drastically increase the number of possible values that we have. And we're not changing the range of the voltage. What we're actually doing is creating finer detail of how precisely we're measuring that voltage and recording that voltage. Oh, I guess I should talk about. So these numbers are what are called samples, and as you can kind of see from the graph, the recorder's job is to keep taking samples very fast over the time of the recording. The number of samples varies. You can set it, but these days the most common is 48 million. No, 48,000. 48,000 samples per second. And typically that's expressed in hertz, even though it isn't really hertz. But so it's 48 kilohertz. Another common standard that you'll find is 44.1 kilohertz, and that comes from CDs, compact discs. That's the sample rate of a compact disc. But starting with DVDs, 48 kilohertz has been the standard. You almost don't need to know that to do the basics for recording, but you should probably sync up with your editor or your whoever.
If you don't, you'll have to constantly edit the sound file for timing, which is what I ran into.
It depends on what editing software you have. If you have good editing software like Premiere Pro, you just drag it in there, and the first time you do it, it'll warn you, and you can say, never bother me about this again, and it'll just do it, and you'll never hear about it again. It'll just work. But it is having to do a conversion, and technically that means there's some degradation of the sound quality. So you really want to find out what the output project is going to be, and you should set your recorder to do that. I'm going to talk about that later, but that's what I'm getting at. So a digital recording is some number of samples per second with some amount of resolution bits for recording each sample.
Are those the only options, 16-bit or 24-bit, or do recorders do all kinds of?
They are not the only options. They are the most common options. I've never seen a recorder that could do 32-bit, for example, or any other thing. These are the only two options on any of the recordings that I have. But I know when I get into Adobe Audition, which is a sound editor, it likes to use 32 bits. In fact, it'll use 32-bit floating precision, which is, anyway, so yeah, these are the common ones, but there are others, theoretically.
And 48 kilohertz is what syncs up to 24 frames per second.
Does not.
Is it 44? 48? 44.
It doesn't sync. It has nothing to do with frames per second. It has
What do you
nothing to do with the picture at all.
So what do you set it's 48 is the standard one,
Mhm.
for the sound setting, so you don't have timing difference from your video source?
That's not why. It has nothing to do with the video.
In my example, where I guess I'm asking, was it 44 or 48 that made me off from the video source?
It wasn't the video source that you were off with. It was the audio recorded with the video.
So the audio recorded with the video, you just have to make sure you sync match.
If you're going to use it, you need to make sure that the bit rate in the video, which is recording audio, the audio bit rate is what you're going to use in your output project.
And is the standard 48?
I believe anything that's recording HD
Mhm.
is almost certainly going to record 48.
Okay.
I don't even know if it's configurable, honestly, in a lot of cameras. And cameras aren't very good at recording sound. They can do it, but if you have a dedicated audio recorder, it's going to have a lot more flexibility and it's going to do a better job of it. We're going to talk about that in a bit. But all right, we moving on? Okay. Okay, so reverb, sound reflections. So here I am in a room with hard surface walls, and you don't think about it, but the reality is my voice is traveling straight toward you, but it is also traveling in this direction, bouncing off the wall toward you. It's going in that direction, bouncing off the wall, and it's bouncing off the ceiling, and it's bouncing off all different parts of the ceiling and the walls and the wall behind you. And the thing with that is that when it finally gets to you, it's had to travel a different distance, more distance, which means it has arrived at a different time. So room reflections and reverb are more or less the same as the source sound, except that they arrive at a different time. And you go stand at a big cathedral and you shout and you're going to hear your voice for 2 or 3 seconds because your voice keeps bouncing around, and the more bouncing it does before it gets back to you, the longer that delay is. In film, there's not really an issue with the delay, but it is a natural phenomenon. And if you don't have any reverb, it's going to sound unnatural. Remember, we did the spelling bee, and right off we were talking about recording from the microphone that was in front of them, and I said that's fine, but it's going to sound like you're in a recording studio, and it's because you're right there next to the microphone and you can't hear any room reverb, and that's totally different from what would sound natural in a big auditorium through a PA system.
So what'd you do?
So we added reverb in post.
And what was the fun comment we talked about as the shot was closer, you wanted me to add more boom mic.
I did.
And that blew my mind.
Yeah.
If you're going to talk about that later.
I'm not going to talk about that later, but yeah, that was the thing. So I am going to talk about how much reverb is natural. So the amount of reverb that you're hearing right now is natural to your ears, but if you heard the same thing through the television, it would sound terrible. The standard in film and television is that they try to come up with a much cleaner sound, eliminate most of, but not all of, the room reverb. If you close your eyes and you watch a television thing, or listen to it, you should be able to hear the difference between when they're in a room and when they're outside. And the difference is that when they're outside, there's no room reverb. There's a little bit of reverb off the ground, but it's very, very almost nothing. And so you're not going to hear room reverb. And so you can hear the difference between a performance that's happening in a room and one that's happening outside. And when you move to an auditorium or a big cathedral, that reverb is going to sound different. You expect it to sound different. And if the filmmakers don't make it sound right, it's going to sound unnatural, and it's going to distract you as the viewer from, right? So, reverb is a thing that we need to know about for 2 reasons. One is that, for the most part, it's noise. It's a thing that we want to eliminate as much as we can. But on the other hand, we still need some. And so getting the right balance is sort of the location sound recordist's job, but ultimately it's the editor's job to fix it if there's not enough reverb. But he can't take reverb out. So you want to get a recording that has as little reverb as you can manage. And then if it's not enough, which would be in few occasions, then the editor will have to artificially add that in post. All right, does anybody have any questions so far? We're doing on time.
12.
Okay.
I just had a thought, if reverb is something that is natural to us, a certain amount of it is natural in some environments and different in others, could it be used to create an unsettling effect if it was off from that?
Yeah, if you wanted to have somebody who's on drugs or somebody who's being, attacked with supernatural whatever, right? That's one thing you could do, is you could probably do this in post, but you could totally add in a reverb effect and just crank it way, way up and make it sound weird, basically. The people listening to it, they won't be able to articulate why it's weird. They just know it sounds weird. But yeah, definitely you could do that.
Business is war. He was in a trance, and the guy says, "Is that what you're wearing, bro? Is that what you're wearing, bro?" And it went down.
Cheesy thing.
Yeah.
That was my reminder earlier that I said.
You got 10 more
I
minutes.
got a few more minutes. All right, I'm gonna move on to our most controversial topic. So, if you are going to do sound for film, you or someone must provide you. Yeah, you either have to have this equipment or someone has to provide this equipment for you on an absolute minimum. There's a lot of other things that I'll bring on a set, but this is the bare bones stuff that you have to record a film.
Are you going to send out these slides?
I am.
Okay.
Well, good question. I think I can just send you a link, a read-only link to this slide deck, but it'll also be in the video. But yeah, so I will say that there are other ways to record audio than on an external recorder, but you won't get good results. You won't get the results that you want for a real film type of audio. A lot of people record audio from the camera, and a lot of people have an on-camera microphone. I'm going to talk more about why that's bad, but so this is what I want you to have. I want you to have some kind of an audio recorder, a digital audio recorder. You should have at least a shotgun microphone. The reality is, for indoor dialogue, I don't use this shotgun microphone most of the time. But if you're only going to have one microphone, it should be a shotgun microphone. You need to have a boom pole. You need to have a shock mount. A shock mount is some kind of springy gizmo that attaches to the end of the boom pole, and then it holds the microphone. And the purpose of that is any shaking vibration in the boom pole won't transmit as much to the microphone. So it reduces handling noise when you're handling the boom. You need a cable to connect the microphone to the recorder, and you need headphones so that you can hear what you're recording. It's actually very important. And I put this in parentheses because technically this is not the sound person's equipment, it's the clapperboard, but there has to be one on set somewhere. You're going to be clapping every take if you don't have one.
Which works okay if you're
Which works okay.
doing it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when people do like interviews, it's typically a one-man show. It's a pretty common thing. It's just to have the interviewer just clap. But you should have one. And on a film, it's a lot more important because you have lots of takes, and you've got to match up video with audio, and so the slate has, you can write on it, so you can write what take it is and what scene it is, so that later on you try and find it and find the audio that goes with it, you can match those up.
One of the most helpful things is a script supervisor who takes notes after every take and can star your best one, and you can start your editing process there, which has saved me hours.
Yes, that's
maybe days.
That's very, very helpful. I will say that even though I normally call that person a script supervisor, on a Hollywood film, that's not the job of the script supervisor. That is the job of the second assistant camera operator,
Oh.
which we never have. So slating and the shot log is technically part of the camera crew's job. All right, so before I talk about equipment, I am going to give a pitch about XLR versus the consumer 1/8" audio jacks. So, so from a technical standpoint, the biggest difference is that it's a balanced cable. I don't know why that word balanced is used because it doesn't have anything to do with balance. What it really means is that the cable is electrically shielded. So one of these pins is a ground, and there's usually a wire braid, sometimes it's foil or whatever, but there's a metal wrapper all the way around the cable, all the way down, and it's connected to the ground. And the value of that is electromagnetic interference is almost completely blocked by that. So if you have a microphone connected to your camera and it's on a 1 foot long cable, that's probably fine. But if you try to do a 20-foot cable with that type of connector and cable, it's not shielded, it's not balanced, you're going to have buzzing and hiss and stuff that's introduced from electromagnetic noise coming around you. So with a balanced cable, you can run almost infinite lengths without introducing any of that kind of noise.
Am I wrong? You can buy XLR cables that are not balanced, so you want to make sure and buy them that are balanced. Is that correct?
I don't know. When I buy XLR cables, I always make sure that it says balanced. I think they are actually all balanced, and I mean that.
I think you got to pay more money.
I've skimped on these,
Yeah.
and don't do that because you just get so much noise. And if you spend $10 more, I mean, they don't have to be very expensive, but there's like a $10 one and a $20 one,
Right.
and the $10 one has a lot of signal noise.
Interesting. I would have kind of assumed that they were all balanced, and they just didn't stay balanced. But on the other hand, I've always made sure that the one that I bought says that.
I think you got to do that. I think
Okay.
you got to say, make sure it says balance on the package or whatever. I think you do. I think Jeff's right.
Or just the quality of that cable. Other stuff was going on. Just don't
Well,
skimp on these.
I mean, they sell really ridiculously
Yeah.
expensive stuff. I don't buy the expensive ones, but I do make sure that they say that they're balanced.
On the other hand, though, the cheap stuff. I've been in a band, and the cheap stuff. If you just buy the real cheap stuff, shielding. Not even talking about shielding. They just break. They just.
Yeah.
Holy cow! This cable's not working anymore. So there's a line to be walked. I don't know where it is.
It's a good idea to bring extra cables with you. So XLR cables also bring phantom power with it, which we talked about earlier when we were talking about condenser microphone. Your microphone needs power supplied to it somehow. Generally, you're going to have a recorder. If it has an XLR port, it can output phantom power. This cable will take it to the microphone, and then your microphone is powered. Real professional microphones don't have any kind of battery option. They all require phantom power if they're a condenser microphone, and so you have to do it. If you're using an 1/8" jack, there is something called plug-in power. It's not the same amount of power. So you're kind of limited in the power that a given microphone can use. And even though it's not technically, because it's XLR, the reality is that if you're buying an XLR recorder and you're buying an XLR microphone, you're generally getting a professional quality. Or I shouldn't say you're much more likely to get a professional quality microphone. And if you get something with that 1/8" jack, that 1/8" jack is generally referred to as consumer microphone, which means it could be a $10 microphone or a $20 microphone. There's very few microphones that are made with that kind of connector that actually have good quality. And I'm probably not going to talk a lot about microphone quality in this, but we can have a conversation about this. And also, this connector is bigger and it locks in place, and it's just a lot more durable, and it's less likely to break, both the connector and the thing that the connector is plugged into. It's just a much more robust connection. All right. So even though the 1/8" jack stuff is cheaper, and a lot of the DSLR, almost all the DSLRs take that kind of connection, it's not a very good quality connector. It's not a good quality preamp. It's good enough for consumers.
And reference sound.
What?
And reference sound, right? So you have something to match up with when you're recording separately. You're talking about
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Well, I would normally just use the built-in microphones on the camera. I personally don't bother to use it. I know a lot of editors, and I don't normally edit a lot of other people's stuff, but I know a lot of editors like to have reference audio in the video, which makes it easier to either sync up the audio, the real audio that you recorded from the recorder, or just to know what was happening if you haven't found the audio clip yet. On the subject of syncing sound, using reference audio to sync, you got to be careful with that sometimes, because there's cameras that actually their audio and their picture are out of sync. The 5D Mark II, by the way, is one of them. That was just the first digital SLR. What the hell is blowing on my phone?
Some bragging going on.
Okay. So, using the audio that accompanies the video as a way to sync up your externally recorded audio works most of the time, but some cameras that won't work right on. You'll have audio that's out of sync.
Are you currently doing a project that you will sync up the audio?
So we're recording this right now, and so I have 2 video cameras. They do have reference audio, and then I'm wearing a lavalier microphone which has a recorder on me. So I'm gonna sync up all of those. I may use the audio that's on one of those cameras because it can hear you guys. This microphone basically cannot hear you. So I may use that if I want to have your questions in here. Is that what you were asking? Okay.
It's useful. That's all I was trying to help you with.
Okay. It is useful. All right. So digital audio recorders. So this is my recommendation for the least expensive recorder that you should get. You should be encouraged to spend more if you have more. But this is a $200 recorder now. It's come way down in price. You can get it locally probably. So the Zoom H4n Pro, and the Pro is important because the one that I have here is before the Pro came out. The Pro has much better preamps, and it has a more ruggedized case. But the preamps are totally worth it. The difference, they developed them for the F-series of recorders, and they're way, way, way better. I don't know if they developed them or just licensed somebody else's technology, but...
Your rice should be stirred.
Thank you. You know, my starter. I gotta... So you guys can ask questions while I'm doing this.
Well, let me ask you, or let me just say, this is what on my personal projects, this is what I use.
Yeah.
And it does a fine job for me. I mean, my audio is always a bugaboo, but it does fine. It says 2 AA run for 6 hours. I'm guessing you got that off their website, because that has not been my experience.
So it has a power saving mode. I don't know if you've read the manual.
No.
But inside the battery compartment, there's a little switch, and I think they call it stamina mode.
Oh.
And
I'll look for that.
It eliminates some of the options. You can't record in just any format. But if you turn that stamina mode on, it will last that advertised amount of time.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'll have to check that out. It's been my experience that it's very dependent upon your record levels. If you put them up, if you're trying to record something and you're turning up the levels because it's a little far away from you or whatever, those batteries are going to last, 30 minutes maybe.
Whoa.
Something like that. But if you turn your if you're someplace where you can have your mic right up against something, you can turn those record levels down. I've never had it last 6 hours. I don't know, maybe it does. I doubt it. But it'll last a little while.
Do you use rechargeable batteries?
I don't. I just buy the AA's.
I haven't used the rechargeable batteries at that recorder, but I've had good success with them, and that's what I use in my Zoom F4. I'm using them in this F1 that I'm wearing now.
So before you go too far on the rice, you don't need to count me and Brianna in on the rice. We won't be doing rice.
Okay. Well, whatever you guys don't need, I'm keeping for later.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna make that.
Okay.
Okay.
Is too much to
Oh.
go forward.
Low card.
And also, if I could also say this, if anybody's using this, my bugaboo on this thing, the mistake that I always make is that you gotta plug in your mic. This is your XLR input here, but there's a button, actually this is a newer model than mine. There's a button right here, oh here it is, here it is. This mic right now is set up to record here. Okay, so you got your headphones in, you're listening, right? And you want to record on a shotgun mic coming out here. You want to make sure that you have 1 and 2 selected, or whatever mics you have selected. Because if you have this on, this is going to be on, you got your headphones on, you hear sound, right? It's coming through, but it's coming from here, it's not coming from the end of the shotgun mic. And I have made that mistake
Too many times?
too many times.
So that was actually my last bullet point on that screen there.
Oh, yes it is.
I shot a film and gave my equipment to someone who
Uh-oh.
ran it, and he bumped that button halfway through, and the audio that we got was just.
Yeah, because it's
We ended up having
In
to
his
reshoot.
pocket, right?
oh man, it's frustrating. It's frustrating. I don't know if anybody saw the Alien movie. That first, the second scene when they're out there, when Eric, my brother-in-law Eric's talking to my niece in the recorder, and all that wind noise.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened. I had my nephew, little Randy. He was running the boom pole, right, and he bumped that, and then it's just taken off those microphones there. He still heard audio coming in his thing,
Right.
and so we had all that wind noise, and we did multiple takes, but we didn't get any through that shotgun mic.
So as you have experience, when you're listening through the headphones, you'll hear that something's wrong. And it may take you a while to figure out what it is. But the more experience you have, the more you'll recognize what's going wrong.
Right. And the way I do it is I just snap my fingers in front of the shotgun mic
Yeah.
and make sure I'm actually hearing that versus the Zoom recorder.
So what you're hearing when it's in the wrong input is you're hearing a lot more room reverb, because instead of the boom microphone, which is right by the guy, you're hearing the sound from 15 or 20 feet away, and also all the other echoes and stuff. So it's going to sound a lot more background noise, is what you're going to hear if you're hearing through your headphones if you do that.
And
So-
won't it, and hopefully, if it's in your pocket as you're moving the boom around, it won't be changing, and you realize,
Don't put that in
oh,
your pocket.
Well, yeah, you don't want to.
because
You're gonna change your. You're gonna press something.
I mean, this
in
is
your pocket.
well, here you can feel it. It protrudes a little, and
so where do you put this? Do you have a little pouch?
I have a pouch for that one that goes on my belt.
Mhm.
They sell other kinds of pouches and stuff that have like a strap that goes over around your
That's
neck.
a good. I'm gonna get me one of them.
Yeah, because you can't hold that in your hand while you're holding a boom microphone.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
I got a little satchel that I put over me and put it in there, but you gotta check your buttons all the time.
I need an excuse for a fanny pack.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what Noah rocks.
I would get one that's
Oh,
specifically
no
made for that
uses one of
recorder.
those?
Fanny
No,
pack.
he has a fanny pack.
Oh, okay.
I was telling him, man, that's not gonna get you the ladies, but as long as he doesn't.
It's gonna get on the right kind of ladies that can see past the fanny pack.
Yeah, they like his hair, so they cancel each other out. So Mike, I know I'm sure there's special occasions where you're gonna have your reverb is gonna have to have certain properties, but is reverb, like when someone's speaking, will it just be straight noise, or will it kind of mimic their voice? It'll sound like a softer version.
It'll sound like what your voice sounds like when you're in a cathedral.
Okay.
Speak into the wall, you can hear it.
So,
I mean,
it'll
you
sound
can
like a
hear it, but you
wobbly-
got to know what you're listening for. But if you're in the concrete stairwell in an office building, or I mean, really any room, there's some reverb, but there's places that do it really prevalently.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, if you had to add in reverb in post.
Yeah.
Like you said, it doesn't happen very often, but you just can't go find like noisy crap on the.
No. So reverb is going to be an effect that takes the original sound signal, just the voice or whatever, and it kind of repeats it at
Softer.
a bunch of different delayed times.
Okay.
And there's mathematical formulas of how it figures out to do that, but yeah, so it's basically maybe the best way to describe it is an echo, and I don't want to do that because there's a separate echo effect, but that's basically what reverb is. It's echoes coming at different times, and they kind of soften themselves out.
So you create it out of your clean audio. Is
Yeah.
the best way.
Yeah.
To do it.
You say you carry this in a satchel, so it keeps like this
I have a
picking up the voice, like rubbing in your.
okay. So first of all, I won't use these microphones.
You can turn it off. Here's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, the holster that I have for it, it's got a thing that comes around it. Partly it's there to keep the rain off it or whatever, but yeah, it exposes the buttons I need, and I can see the display.
I do use it, I have used it for various things. If somebody's talking on a podium, I can use those top mics. I just set that up there, make sure it's on those top mics and hit record.
So this recorder was made for bands to record themselves. And it's great because it gives you this the way the microphones are pointed, it gives you this great stereo image, but the microphones are made for loud noises, loud bands, and they don't do really well with quiet audio. So they have a fair amount of self-noise hits.
Yeah, I've had good luck with them. Of course, I'm not a purist on that, but and I would also say
they're not very directional. So
they're not directional.
So you see a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of times you see pictures of people mounting that on top of their camera and shooting video with it. Those guys have been scammed because they're not getting
Yeah.
directional audio toward they're hearing everything. And
I
so
don't
unless
do
your
that.
job is to pick up birds or ambient sound or something like that, then you're not getting what you really want.
Well, if that's what you're trying to get, if you're trying to get room tone or something, well, no, you wouldn't do room tone. But let me also say, on that top of that, with those microphones, I have taken those foam heads for like Shure SM58s, band stage microphones. And you can stretch that over that if you're outside and you need to minimize wind noise or something
I
like
think
that. Those do fit.
I think it comes with a foam cover.
It might. It's
And
been
then-
years ago.
Yeah,
so.
and you can buy the furry dead mouse things put over it too.
Yeah, but I'm saying that, just the regular foam thing that goes over
Right.
a stage mic will fit over that.
Mhm.
I've been using that for a long time.
So I'm telling you my opinion, which is I don't think they have any useful value in film, but if it's the best that you've got, I can see why you might use it. Where's my clicker? Did I-
Better than an
It's just-
8-inch,
I have
right?
no choice.
Camera.
What's that,
It
Melissa?
says better than the camera mic, right?
Yeah.
It is totally better than the on-camera microphone. Yeah, I will admit that.
This is the minimum.
This is the minimum, okay? So, I mean, my Zoom F4 there is going for like $700 right now, and it's way more featureful, and the Pro probably has about as good a preamps, but I have a volume knob instead of having to hit the button. You can't adjust the volume, the gain during the shot because you'll hear the click, 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 click of the button. And this thing lets you record metadata about the scene and the take number with it, so it's really easy for the editor to match up later. Whereas this just records numbered file. So I mean, and that has more inputs, but really you can get good results with this recorder. There's no shame in this recorder. There's another company called Tascam, which produces a lot of stuff like this, but it's cheaper. It's cheaper, and I don't recommend any of it. I really don't recommend that brand at all. Everything that I've ever gotten from that has disappointed me.
What brand was that again?
Tascam. Alright, so you need a microphone. If you're only going to have one, it should be a shotgun microphone. This is the Rode NTG2, which is currently about $270. This is what I would consider the bottom line microphone that you can have. Rode also makes something called an NTG3, which sounds quite a bit better, mainly in the high end, the high frequency stuff. So this is going to sound just a little bit muddier, more muffled, but it's if you don't know what you're looking for, you're not comparing them side by side. It's pretty subtle, and so a lot of amateur films have been made with this microphone, and I would stand behind it. But this is definitely an example of if you can spend more money, you probably should. And I'm not saying you should just go out and buy whatever microphone costs more money, but you should research, microphones that people recommend for filmmaking, and if it costs more, it's probably going to be better than this one. So this is a $270 mic. The NTG3 is like an $800 mic. The one I showed you a minute ago is Sennheiser MKH416, and it's a $1,000 mic. And then Sanken makes something. Is it Sanken? No, Shops. Shops makes something that's like $2,000. That Sennheiser I like because not only is it very popular and audiences are kind of accustomed to that sound personality, but it's also really good for outdoors because a lot of microphones are kind of susceptible to humidity, and this one is very resistant to that. When you're shooting outdoors in St. Louis, there's humidity, and if you get rained on and it's inside a windscreen, there's more humidity. So anyway, so Rode NTG2.
Does humidity cause damage, or does it just kind of muffle all that vibration?
I think it makes the microphone malfunction and stop working until it dries out.
Okay. But I mean, like if it gets wet and...
So you remember earlier I was talking about the diaphragm and that
Yeah.
condenser plate behind it? Those are really, really close, and I think the humidity screws up the capacitance.
But it's like, if it dries out, it should be fine.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Because like I'd be paranoid, like, oh, it's 75% outside. I'm not
I
gonna
have
shoot today.
a microphone up on this table here that I was using as a plant mic on the table, and someone dumped a pitcher of water on it. Wasn't real happy
Are
about
they
that.
in this room?
They are not in this room. And the director I will never work with again, but that wasn't the director's fault.
Your list is growing.
I
Yeah.
don't remember doing that.
But no, it's the same one. You heard me bitch about that guy before. He's just done several things. But anyway, so I was relieved to find out that still works. But I think the humidity problem just makes the microphone stop working until it dries out.
Okay.
Not that I've ever experienced that, but
Now, I keep my mic in a Zeppelin, in a dead cat at all times, whether I'm shooting inside or out. Your opinions on that?
I think that's excessive for indoors.
Does it impact the sound? I mean, all I'm trying to do is it's kind of a pain in the butt.
It impacts the sound just a tiny little bit, but it creates more gap. It moves your microphone farther away.
It does.
So if you can avoid it, I would forego that so that you can be closer. Indoors, the little foam windscreen is usually enough. When I shoot indoors, I usually don't use any windscreen at all. But if I'm having to move the microphone to track with an actor who's moving or switch from one actor to another their dialogue, just moving across creates enough wind that it rumbles. And so the foam windscreen that it comes with is enough to solve that indoors. But it's not enough to solve 10-mile-an-hour winds outside. Also, this looks really cool on that camera. You do a wedding reception with that microphone sticking out the front, and people feel a little bit intimidated because it's pointing out that. All right. So you need a boom pole. I don't know what to give for this recommendation. I've listed this one. Rode makes some boom poles, and generally speaking, Rode makes stuff that's usable quality. It's maybe not the best, but it's usually acceptable. But apparently not their boom poles. I mean, you showed me your boom pole. It's crap. I hate to say that. And it looks like it was crap when it was new, and then it wore out really easily. So they have other boom poles, Rode does, but they're just as expensive as the K-Tech one that I use. I like that brand, but this is a 9-foot aluminum boom pole with an internal cable, and I want to say this is like $250, $270 for this. And they make carbon fiber ones that are a little lighter, and they make longer ones, and they have some expensive stuff. But this, when I was looking around for a recommendation that I can give as a minimum, this is like $70 for the 9-foot one. This does not have an internal cable, but it has a way that you can pop the end off here and feed your cable through it. So if your boom pole doesn't have any kind of cable raceway or an internal cable, then you have to kind of wrap the cable around it, which, I mean, that's a lot of pros do that. But anyway, so I think I'm going to recommend this, but I've never actually handled this one. I don't really know. But I looked at the reviews, and I looked at the pictures, and I feel like if you only had $70 to spend to get started, it'd probably work. I was tempted to buy one just to see before I gave this recommendation. Whatever. I really like K-Tech. All their products are really good quality, and they're pretty light. So you need a shock mount.
Yeah, this is a better one than mine.
My favorite shock mount is this one, which is made by Rycote, and it's got the series is called something like Lyra or something like that, and they've licensed the technology to Rode for theirs. So this Rode one costs less than the Rycote one, but it should be just as good. The one thing to be careful of when you're buying one is that most boom poles have 3/8" threads. Most microphone stands have 5/8" threads, and so the people who make these shock mounts feel compelled to make it either work with both somehow, or a lot of them come and they only work with 5/8", and you have to put an adapter in there. So pay attention to what size thread it is and make sure it matches up with the boom pole that you're going to put it on. Also, so you see these little loops here. They generally come in different diameters, so you can accommodate different microphones. Most of the microphones that you're going to use from a boom are about the same diameter, so these are generally work. But you know, just make sure that it's going to fit yours, because if you get one and it's too loose and it won't hold it up, you've wasted your money. You need an XLR cable. If your boom pole doesn't have a cable in it, then you have to go from the recorder to the microphone at the end, which could be several feet when you have it extended. Even with your internal cable, you still have to have a cable that goes from the back end of the boom pole to your recorder. So it should be a balanced XLR cable. You can get really expensive ones. I generally don't buy one that's more than $20. There's a company called Nutric that makes a lot of these connectors for other companies, and they're great connectors. So, I mean, in terms of spending money, you're spending money on a decent connector that's not going to fall apart, and a cable that's tough. It's not going to break the first time you step on it.
So what's the average length? That's a good length.
So a professional is probably going to use an excessively long cable and then loop it up in a, I think I put one out here somewhere. So this is a it's a little strap with a clip, and then it's got a little carabiner clip. And so I can clip this to my belt loop or something like that, and then I can loop up the cable and my excess cable in here. And then when I need to get more length, I can pop this open and lengthen it out. That said, I never do that. I use this thing, which is like 6 feet, and it's got a right angle connector because it goes on the back end of the boom pole, and that's enough. That's enough freedom of motion usually for me between the boom pole and the recorder. That said, when I have my boom pole stretched out to 9 feet long and I need to like change the angle of the microphone, I can't move the pole that far because my cable's only 6 feet. So I'm usually bumping it on the ceiling in order to change it. But so I generally buy like 25-foot cables, except for this thing. But they sell a lot longer cables. It kind of depends on your application. Yeah, I generally buy 25-foot cables, and I bring a lot of them with me because if I have to run a plant mic, it may be more than 25 feet. So I'll just connect several of them together to do that. But
When you say plant mic,
I'm going to talk about that later. But a plant mic is a microphone that you plant in a place hidden somewhere in the scene. And it's not on a person, it's not on a boom pole, but you're gonna probably have to run a cable to your recorder somehow. I think it's called a plant light literally because the first occasions of using that was to put them behind a plant. You gotta have headphones. You have to listen to your audio as you're recording it. I'm gonna talk more about that later. You should get closed back circumaural headphones. So circumaural means it goes around your ear, not on your ear. When you're looking at them, a lot of times they won't say circumaural, they'll just say around the ear. But that's what you want. So you want to completely cover your ear. And closed back means that the outside is closed off from the inside. So you're hearing very little of the room outside it and the noise and the people. And you're mostly only hearing the sound that comes through the headphones themselves. So you're really trying to pay attention to the sound that the microphone is getting, not just everything that's happening around you. So it has the downside of when someone walks up to have a conversation with you, you can't hear them. But that's definitely the kind you need. I have used with some good success the earplugs that kind of have like a rubber thing that actually seals up in your ear. Those work out pretty well for me, and I tend to carry one of those as a spare. But the full-size headphones do a better job of blocking out outside noise, and they also have a better sound dynamic range of. What's the word I'm looking for? Dynamic frequency. What is the word I'm looking for? Anyway, it'll come to me later.
Sound
I'm getting
voodoo.
old.
Good sound voodoo.
It has good sound voodoo.
Yeah.
Anyway, so these are decent headphones. I mean, if you get really cheap headphones, you're gonna get headphones that are muddy and don't really accurately represent the sound. You're gonna maybe get headphones that hiss a little bit. But these are decent. The ones that I use here are like $150. And of course you can get crazy expensive audiophile ones. They're pretty much useless, and they're generally not closed back anyway. Someone needs a slate. Slates are not expensive. I mean, you can get expensive ones, but I wouldn't because they get beat out. They get destroyed. That one's like 6 months old. Nah, a year old, and it's all scratched up and worn out. I don't know what happened to it, but
So you've gone through one of these a year?
no, I made my last one. I limped along a lot, but it kept breaking, and I kept like fixing it. Like one of the nuts kept falling off, and I ended up Loctiting it on, and then the hole that it goes through broke out, and I kept gluing it back in, and finally got tired of it.
Have you, has anybody had any experience with those slates for like tablets and stuff like that? Anybody used any of those? I haven't.
Used.
no.
I have an app on my phone. It's hard because you have to give someone your phone, or the iPad runs out of batteries, and I've just liked the simplicity that people can just write on the takes
Yeah.
rather than go in there and fiddle with the app. 'Cause then it's a $500 slate with your iPad. But and then it's everything takes longer to type in the thing versus just a quick erase one.
Yeah.
I have it.
I guess it's not worth it to get one of those really fancy ones that has all the electronics built in. It's like
So you're talking about timecode slates, and
Slates.
it can be worth it to post-production if you have a
That's what I'm
camera,
talking
a
about.
recorder, and a timecode slate that all do timecode, and they can sync together. Because if you could do that, and this Zoom 4 can do that, if you can use timecode, then you can dump all that stuff on the editor, and the editor can automatically match up the audio with the video. Not only will it sync it for you, but it should be able to find which audio file goes with which video file because it was recorded at the same time. And to me that sounds like it would be a huge time-saving thing. I've never been on a set that has used it. I keep because this recorder does it. I'm eager to like, can your camera do it? And what I found is that a lot of cameras, some cameras can do it, but don't do it well, and like their sync drifts. And so you end up having to get an external box to plug into the camera to drive the camera to keep it in sync, and no one wants to mess with that. So I've never actually gotten to use it.
So the Blackmagic and the Canon C100, do we have
The
that option?
C100 cannot do it. The C300 can do it, but
Yeah.
that is an example of a camera that people say doesn't stay in sync very well.
Okay.
The Blackmagic cannot output a time code, but can input one. So if you have a box, or if you left your recorder connected to the camera, it can do it. So far I haven't found a situation where it's been worthwhile. Now I just think of this, didn't put it on the slide, but you also need a dry erase marker to use with the slate. Unless you can actually still buy the chalkboard style slates.
And
And then you
eraser.
need chalk. Yeah, you need an eraser, although your finger will work.
And you put the awesome touch of a label maker for the stuff that's
I
not
think
going to
that's
change
awesome.
that day.
So
Just getting crazy.
even if you don't use a label maker, a common thing for people to do is like your production and your director and stuff. That's not going to change throughout your entire shoot, but it's really easy for that to get rubbed off. So if you just put a piece of clear tape over it, or you can get white gaff tape over it and then write on the gaff tape, then it stays on there and never comes off through your entire shoot. So people do a lot of stuff like that. But yeah, I've bought a label maker that's capable of printing 1-inch wide labels, and I could buy clear tape for it, and it's really pretty. But that's all it is pretty. All right, so there's your budget, your minimum budget. All right, so we were talking earlier about sample rate and sample size, and we didn't talk about the different types of file. So these are things that that you should coordinate with someone, ideally the editor, but the editor you may never get to meet because the editor typically doesn't show up on the set. So I like to have this conversation ahead of time by email or something. So I'll ask the director or whoever who's contacted me, and most common answer I get back is I don't know. So so these are the settings that I use by default, and they work most of the time. So first of all, most recorders will let you use a WAV file or an MP3 file. MP3 is a lossy compression, which means that it saves approximately what it recorded, and it can do it in a whole lot less space. And if you're downloading days worth of music files, that makes some sense. But with just one track, I've never filled up a 2 gigabyte. I don't think I've ever filled up a 1 gigabyte memory card on a whole day of shoot. I put 8 gigabyte cards in that thing, and often record multiple inputs, and it's fine. I'll usually do the whole film, even if it's multiple days, and have plenty of space on the card. So space is cheap. There's no reason to do compression.
Also on that Zoom, if you have a big card like a 32 gigabyte or something like that,
It takes longer to
forever
boot. Yes, I've noticed that.
for it to like boot up. So I mean, it's not forever, but it just takes longer. You
It
might as
does.
well just go with an 8 or whatever you
Well,
want.
that's the reason I use the 1
Yeah.
gig, is because it takes a lot less time to start up.
It does.
I'm hoping that the Pro version is fixed, but I mean, none of my other Zoom products do that, so.
So this might be something you're gonna talk about later, but like when you say format, is that what the digital recorder, is that where that stuff gets
Yeah,
sent?
I'm sorry, I guess I should have spelled that out. So what I'm talking about is the recording format that you're going to configure your recorder so that it saves the audio in files, and you want to control what type of file, and you know the sample rate and the sample size. You want to set those in a file that matches what the project output is going to be.
And that all happens in the digital recorder?
That all happens in the digital recorder.
Okay.
So like what Jeff was talking about earlier, if your sample rate doesn't match, then the software has to convert it, and some software may be whiny about it, and it's an issue. But and so if you can find out from the editor what the project output is going to be, they can tell you, and then you can set your recorder to match that. But most of the time it's probably going to be 48K. The bit rate, they're probably not going to output 24 bits. But if you give them 24 bits, remember earlier I was talking about it gives you a lot finer precision in the sample. It gets a much precise measurement. Because that's finer detail, when the editor is changing it later, and all of the things that an editor is normally going to change about audio format are going to affect the sample value, not the speed. So he's gonna increase or decrease the volume. He's going to EQ. He's gonna raise or lower different frequencies within the file. He may do a low pass filter or something like that. But all of those things are the kinds of things that a film editor is going to do, and all of those will happen with much more precision. You'll lose less precision if you start out with more precision to begin with. So if you can record it at a higher sample size, then that will give the editor a cleaner output after he's made a bunch of changes to it. So that's why I like to use that by default. 24 bits is the highest that my recorders do. And 48 is very common, and WAV, even though it's bigger, it gets the exact recording, and it doesn't change it when it compresses it. So these are my recommendations, but these are things that you really should have a conversation with somebody about ahead of time, if they know. And if they don't know, just use these. They'll figure it out.
And have a test, if you really don't know, before you do your whole movie, to make sure you don't have a sync problem with your video and audio.
Clipping. So this is a seriously important thing. So you see over here, I've got this waveform, and then suddenly it gets louder, and it gets so loud that it gets higher than the recorder can record. So remember, I said that the digital recording is storing numbers. So there's a minimum number and a maximum number. On the recorder, it's going to assign decibel values, and so they're all negative numbers. So the highest number is 0. So if you've got the level, the gain set on your recorder too high, then if the sound gets unexpectedly loud, it's going to get cut off. It's going to reach a value it can't store a number big enough because it's only got so many numbers that it can store. So it's going to cut it off, and that's called clipping. And occasionally, if you have some clipping, it might not sound too bad, but most of the time it's going to sound horrendous. It's going to sound awful. I was listening to those films, and there was at least one film that had bad clipping. And I thought about making some audio recordings to demonstrate how bad it sounds, but basically it's totally taboo. You absolutely want to avoid it.
You sound like a bad drive-through speaker.
Yeah, that's a good example. And it sounds that way because it's doing that.
Yeah.
Your sample settings are at 44 and 16, and I would love to see 48 and 24 there.
Well, actually, I stole this picture out of the manual because this is one of the few that showed this clipping indicator, which I'm going to talk about. So yeah, I would.
Because that's what's going to cost you a whole shoot if that number's not right.
That 44.1?
Yeah.
No, it's not. You're just gonna have to lean on the editor to figure out how to make his workflow work. Or you're gonna go to your own. If you're me, you're gonna go to your own software and say, fine, I'll convert it for you, and I'll give you 48.
So
seriously, if you have that problem and you think you've lost everything, say something to your sound guy because he may have a solution for you. Like, I'll just send all these through Audition for you.
Right. So it's just this real small window, and you got to make sure that says 48 and 20/24.
Yeah. So this is part of the status display. This is actually from the Zoom H4n, but yeah, I just took this out of the manual. So they use that number by default a lot. I think that's probably the default setting.
Because MP3 was the rage, or CD was the rage, or something.
CD was the rage for a long time. But so anyway, so to avoid clipping, first you're gonna get a sense for how loud the talent is going to be, or whatever it is you're recording. So normally I'm going to stick my boom out in front of them, and before we actually do a live take, I'm going to ask them to go through their lines. And I'm going to look at the meter. So what you're not seeing on here is there's a little bar that moves in and out as they talk, and it's real time, and it shows how loud they are. And the closer it gets up to 0, this number 0, this is the max, the more danger you are in. So, and if it gets all the way to 0 on this recorder, it's going to fill in this little block and it'll be black instead of open like that. So you're gonna actually watch the meter while they're giving their lines, and you're gonna get a sense for how loud they are, and you're gonna adjust the level on the recorder so that you have plenty of headroom. And then what's going to happen is they're going to do the first actual take, and the actor's going to be way louder because when the actor gets in the moment, they're actually using their emotions to perform. They're not paying attention to how loud they are, and it's more real for them when they do it, when they're doing the take, than it is when they're reading lines for you. So even though you just asked them, how loud are you going to be, do that, it's not going to be as loud as they're really going to be. So you just got to go with it.
When you say adjusted, you said something about gains. Is that like a little?
Yeah, so on the recorder, you're going to have some kind of adjustment, and it's going to be named different things. This one is labeled record level. On this thing, I think it's not labeled on the recorder, but in the manual it's referred to as gain. And the word gain means amplification. It's gaining. It's adding additional. It's boosting the volume. Technically, what it is, it's electronically amplifying the signal that comes in from the microphone before it goes to the AD converter. I've actually seen recorders that had two separate. One was gain and one was level for the same input, which I never really figured out why. But so the bottom line is you're going to have some adjustment that you can control how loud it's recording, and you want to bring it down enough that you get the whole recording without clipping.
So, an example then, if you're out there and you're okay, you do a little.
This will
easier
probably
line
make more sense. We're going to do some hands-on later.
Okay.
You'll hear it and you'll totally understand it when you see it. So, yeah. So you want to give yourself some headroom, and the norm is 12 dB, 12 decibels. So you see there's minus 12 here, and there's a mark there. You want to adjust your level so that the loudest things stay basically under the minus 12 and rarely cross over that. Minus 12 is an arbitrary number, but it works. It tends to be good. And so then if you do a recording and it's louder than you expected, you're probably going to be saved by this extra room that you gave yourself.
You ever adjust it as you're going?
I try not to. I sometimes do. You got to be careful if you do that, because the editor is going to take that audio file and they're going to normalize it, and they're probably not going to expect it to have changed in the middle of the recording. That's one problem. Another problem is that I actually have a recorder that makes a little noise in the recording when you turn the knob. And on that one, it's a button, and you can actually hear across the room the button being clicked when you press it. So I try not to. So, but if you do clip and you have to adjust it, you got to tell whoever is recording logs for this, I clipped. I had a problem with the audio, so the audio is no good. They may ask you why, or they may not care why, but it's got to be recorded on a log somewhere so that the editor knows that they can't use that tape.
Wait,
They can't use the tape because it clipped or because you changed the audio level?
I'm talking about the clipping, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm going to talk more about that kind of stuff later on,
But you'll adjust it before and after takes, just not during.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm not
You're-
saying that you can't do it, but it's trouble.
Can you ever have it set too low?
Yes and no. I'm going to say that theoretically the editor can normalize the gain to any amount. The exception to that is people who use Final Cut Pro, which apparently can only adjust it by 12 decibels.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but
There's ways around it. But
and the other problem is that if you have your gain way too low, if you have it really low, you're not lowering the self noise that comes from the recorder and probably maybe the microphone. So if the recorder is creating a little bit of hiss, if you get a good recorder, that'll be so subtle you won't hear it. But you will hear it if you have recorded your thing way down and then you have to amplify it in post. You're also amplifying that hiss. And so if you have it so far low that your subject's signal is close to the hiss of the camera, then your hiss is going to be a lot more noticeable. So you generally want to, I do tend to give myself a lot of headroom, and then I don't have to worry about it. So minus 12 dB, that's what I aim for, but then I'll run into some loud take and I'll adjust it down some more, and then I'll end up leaving it down the rest of the day. So a lot of times I'll have 20 dB of headroom, and that means the editor has to fix that, has to amplify it in post, and that's a problem with some software. Yeah. So you want to. You absolutely don't want to clip, and you don't really want it to be too low. But the more precise you are aiming at minus 12 dB, the more you're going to have to work at it. So it's a balance. So you have to check every single tape and make sure it didn't clip. And the problem is, you got a boom, there's a microphone way over there. You are mostly watching the microphone because you don't want it to dip down. You don't want to hit the actor in the face with it, and it's hard to look at them and at the meter on your recorder. So you need to figure out how your recorder indicates that it clipped when you weren't watching it. So that's why I was talking about these little blocks here. If any time during the take it clips, it's gonna fill in this block dark, and so when you get to the end of the take and you stop, you look, and if you see that that's black, then you know somewhere you clipped in there. However, that doesn't mean that you clipped. It could mean that you only clipped when they slapped the sticks on the clapperboard, because you'll have the guy who's really excited to do this clapperboard thing, and this is the first take of the day, and he's got it right here in front of the actor, and your microphone's right here, and he calls it out, and then that clipped. I guarantee it every time. So you'll have a word with that guy and say, can you? The term is soft sticks, but can you lighten up so that you don't clip? You really want to avoid clipping when this happens, so that your indicator is meaningful at the end of the tape. So it may show that it's clipped when it really only clipped when it was when the clapperboard slapped down.
So
if it's an important take, and like it was really hard to get that, and if it's not bad, you don't want to discard it, you should play it back and watch the meter as you're playing it back and see if it clipped during that. Because if it only clipped when the sticks were slapped, then the rest of the take is good and you can say so. But you got to play it back to be sure.
Were you listening to every take, or were you just trying to look at the zeros when you do sound? Like, 'cause I don't think you listen to every take all the way through.
I don't play back every take, but I look at this thing.
And we don't peek on our slate for most of the takes.
Not most of them. But you've heard me have conversations with the clapperboard operator. You may not have noticed, but sometimes I will point the microphone away.
Yeah.
That's why I'm doing that. And a lot of times the microphone and the slate are pretty far apart. So.
Okay.
So some recorders will let you do what's called a safety track. That one does. That one does not. In a safety track.
Which one are you pointing at?
So my Zoom F4. My Zoom F4 will do safety tracks. None of these others will. And so what I do is it's not labeled in here as safety track. It's labeled as dual channel, dual input recording. But if I turn that on, then it steals one of these other inputs. So if I turn on dual recording on track 1, input 1, it will record on input 1 and also on input 3. Identical inputs. But the difference is that I can set the gain on track 1 to be higher than gain on track 2. So or 3. So track 3 is recording lower. It's the same input, but it's recording at a lower level. So that even though I've worked to get to my levels right so that I won't clip, you get an actor who screams louder than they did the last 3 times, or the microphone was closer when they did it, or there's a door slam, or they trip over whatever, right? You want to get that if you can. And so if you have a recorder that can do it, and you're in a shot that there's an unpredictable element to how loud it's going to get, it's a good idea to turn that on. And so you set one of the recordings that records at a lower level, and you label it as a safety track, either in the recorder if you can do that, or you tell the guy logging, say this track 3 is safety track. And so the editor, when they're editing, when they're just trying to decide what assets to use, they're going to prefer to use the track that's recorded at the higher level. But if it's clipping in a thing that they need to not clip, then they can go to the other track that's recorded at a lower level and use that instead. So, yeah, if you have the option and you're in a situation that makes sense for it.
What am I spending for that unit?
That
recording
one?
unit,
That's
yeah.
a $700. And there's a Zoom F8. They just announced a Zoom F8N, which has got some updates, some enhancements. So don't buy the F8, buy the F8N, which will be coming out in a month or so.
And that one has the.
That's the same as that, only it's 8 inputs instead of 4, and it's got a color LCD, and there's a few other differences, but basically it's the big brother to that one. And I want to say that one's normally about $1,000. And then you can get a sound devices recorder for $3,000 or $4,000. If you're in Hollywood, that's what they use. All right.
So are there places, this is kind of off topic, sorry, but are there places around here that rent that kind of
Yes.
high level?
Yes. Bad Dog rents it. I think they're like the last people now that rent it.
I'm sure they have sound equipment.
Bad Dog definitely has sound equipment, and they have all of the stuff. They'll have a Zoom F4 if you want to use that. They'll have a sound devices recorder if you want to use that. They have all these same choices about how much to spend. They have that same range of stuff, and it'll reflect in the rental cost. But yeah, you can rent it for a lot less than you can buy it. And if you're going to make 3 films a year, you'll never pay that stuff off before it's, well, some of this stuff lasts forever. Like a microphone's good forever, but until you break it. But yeah, like a camera or stuff like that, they're obsolete in a couple of years. And so depending on how often you use them, it's probably better to rent it. So I think it's time for a break. All right, so I've told you that you've got to, I need to readjust it. You've got to listen to your, you got to listen to the recording as you're taking it, and you're listening for specific things. You're listening for background noises. Ideally, you're going to find those before you start recording, although I've found that you can't hear them until everyone shuts up. So you'll spend 30 minutes in a room and there's a noise that you haven't identified because everyone's making noise setting up. And then you get ready to take your first take and somebody calls quiet on the set, and that's going to be the first time you notice that the air conditioner's running or that there's some really loud computer or something somewhere. So these are all the kinds of things that I typically run into. Coolers are like under bars all the time. You shoot somewhere in a bar, and underneath the bar there's a bunch of these coolers, and they're 100 years old, and they're just really freaking loud. And you have the microphone pointed straight at them because you're pointing down, so they're ridiculous. Computers sometimes are pretty noisy, just a fan and stuff. Fluorescent lights, they buzz, and you're going to hear them more if your microphone is up close to them. So that could be an issue. You're never going to eliminate them all. You're going to eliminate the ones you know about. Go ahead.
A fountain ruined one of my movies' audio completely, and I didn't think about it till I got home.
Really? Interesting. But you did hear the fountain. You just didn't think about it. Really?
This was one of the first things
Okay.
I ever did. Didn't know what I was doing. We could shoot in the park. Why not? And the fountain was right there, and certain scene, like it was in certain angles. So like one angle, fountain right there. Boom, turned a little bit. The next angle, no fountain. It was terrible, audio-wise.
Friends of mine got married in Tower Grove Park, and so in the audio in the video that I took, there's the next pavilion over. There's a bunch of people doing the duck dance thing, and so there's duck dance music, and the people who got married, they got a kick out of that. But anyway, so yeah, there's you want to eliminate as much of those things as you can. In the reality, you're not going to eliminate all. But you gotta. We're going to talk about room tone later, but you gotta record some assets that give the editor the ability to kind of work it in and at least make it consistent, and then you can try to cover it with music. But as much as possible, you want to remove background sounds. So probably the most critical thing is listening for bad takes. So you're running a take. It's a 2-minute scene, and while you're listening, there's a motorcycle gang drives by. 2/3 of the time, you were the only person who's actually heard it, or excuse me, noticed it. Everyone else probably heard it; they just didn't notice it. But you're going to hear it better than anyone else because you've got the headphones on, and you're probably going to have it turned up louder than the actual volume. And if you can hear it, that means it's been recorded. It's on the recording. But on the other hand, sometimes just because you can hear it doesn't mean it's so loud that it's actually a problem. I've done a lot of things where I've heard some noise, an airplane or whatever, and I thought that would ruin the take, but you actually play it on normal equipment and you barely hear it, and then when you have music or something covering it, it's not even noticeable. So you're gotta get used to how bad does it have to be before it's really bad. But you got to listen for all of that stuff. I'm going to talk more about this later. Another thing you got to listen for is that you actually heard and recorded the thing that needs to be recorded. So the most common example of this is you've got a microphone here, and your actor's given his whole line, but then for one part of it, he turns around and says something. And now he's facing away from the microphone. He's 2 feet away from the microphone, and he totally didn't get it. And so you gotta know that happened. There's a couple strategies you can do. One is you can try to move with him and know when he's going to move, but sometimes he moves at a different time each time. Another is that you keep the microphone on this side of him to begin with. Another strategy is you ask the director to tell him to hold it still, right? Don't turn until he's done giving the line, or turn, then give the line. Don't give the line while you're turning. Those are all options. The director is usually pretty accommodating, but sometimes it's important that he gives the line while he's moving. But anyway, you gotta listen for those things and know that you got good audio for the entire line. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later too. You also need to listen for noises that you make. So you've got this boom, and it's directly attached to the microphone. Can you guys hear that? Well, you could totally hear it in the microphone. And even if you're just slightly, just moving your hand a little bit or just that's really loud on the microphone. So you're gonna listen for that, and that's gonna teach you habits of not moving your hands during the take. I mean, you have to move at some point, but while you're recording, you're gonna move in a way that doesn't actually make your hands move and stuff on the boom. And you'll know when you're doing it wrong because you'll hear it, but only if you're listening.
You gotta ring and take it off too.
Mm.
Because you cannot keep metal on metal still.
I have not had a ring the entire time I've been doing filmmaking. I plan to keep it that way too. And again, we talked earlier about clipping. So after each take, you're gonna check to make sure it didn't clip. Where'd my clicker go? So once in a while, you're gonna have someone who doesn't want you to use your recorder. They want to record the audio in the camera. I didn't bring it up, but I have a field mixer. So instead of a recorder, it's a box that has XLR inputs for microphones, and I can control the gain, and I can listen to it on the headphones, but it doesn't record anything. It outputs that on other ports that get connected to something else. Could be a different recorder, or it could be the camera. So that camera up there on the big stand, that has XLR inputs. So I could feed that camera from the mixer, and so when the camera is recording video, it's also recording the audio that came from the boom mic. That said, even a camera like that has XLR inputs, those XLR inputs are not as good as a dedicated recorder typically is. So you're going to have better quality probably. You're going to have more control if you're in control of the levels and stuff like that. With the mixer, you kind of set a level on the camera, and then you make sure that the output of the mixer doesn't exceed that, and you have to control the gain to do that on the mixer. Normally there's a test tone. The mixer would output a tone, and then you would check to see that it's that it's not clipping on the camera, essentially. And there's a thing called tape return, which basically is you have the headphone output on the camera running back to your mixer, so that your mixer, you can switch to that to make sure that you're hearing the signal that got to the camera and back, to ensure that it's actually reaching the camera and nothing's, a cable's disconnected or anything like that, just as a check. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I definitely don't recommend it, and it's not very common, especially in filmmaking. But
Why do people do it then? I mean, what's the benefit, or what do they think the benefit is?
the benefit is that the editor doesn't have to sync up sound and video. They're recorded together, so it can speed up post-production. It's probably more common in interviews and news gathering type of situations than it is for filmmaking. And you just might have a guy who just thinks that's the sensible way to do it. Don't use it. You like that. So you're going to have a lot of microphones that have a little switch on it that's labeled low cut or high pass or something like that. There's typically a function on your recorder that has that also. The advertised purpose of this is to reduce wind rumble. When the wind hits the microphone, try to remember to mention that when we do hands-on, you guys can hear what it sounds like. But the sound that the microphone records is this really low rumble. And because it's a low frequency, you can reduce it if you just reduce all the low frequency sounds. And that's what a low cut filter does, or a high pass filter. It reduces or almost eliminates low frequency sounds. Problem is, there are low frequency sounds that you want, like my voice. You know, some people don't have a lot of low frequency components in their voice, but I do. So if you cut that out, it's going to make their voice sound tinny, and it really affects the voice. So it's kind of a last ditch, a last resort if you can't prevent wind rumble for any other way. But there are definitely better ways to do it that don't sacrifice the low frequency spectrum. So frequency spectrum, that's the word I was looking for. So I hit all my points. Yeah, so instead of using the low cut, use a windscreen. And I think I'm going to talk a little more about windscreens later, but yeah, I never use it. I never use the low cut filter on either the microphone or the recorder. Another thing that recorders typically have is something called a limiter, which is going to be a little confusing for Jeff, because Jeff has been using a limiter function in his software as a hack to get around the fact that it can only adjust the volume by 12 dB. So the actual purpose of a limiter, we were talking earlier about clipping. So the limiter's job is, instead of your sound peaking up beyond where you can record, it smoothly curves off the top of the peaks to keep them under 0 dB so that it doesn't clip. If it worked well, then it would be a perfect solution. It would make those things sound good without clipping. The problem is, I've never found one that worked well. All of the limiters either don't limit enough that they actually prevent the problem, or they limit it way too much and it makes the recording sound bad. So depending on your recorder, it might be one of those that it doesn't hurt to have it on, even if it doesn't work perfectly. In that case, there's no problem turning it on and leaving it on. But on some recorders, it's disadvantageous, and you're better off leaving it off. So I almost never use it on any of my recorders. Phantom power. We talked about this a little bit before. Almost all of the microphones that you're going to use in filmmaking are going to be condenser microphones, and they need power one way or another. Some microphones have a place to put in a battery. It tends to be optional, so you can supply phantom power or put a battery in the microphone. And typically, when you use phantom power versus the battery, you get a little bit better signal, more sensitivity out of the microphone. So generally, that's a setting that you have to turn on your microphone. On your recorder. It may be on a per port basis, or it may just turn on all the ports. There's probably recorders out there that don't do it. Actually, I know there are. So, like Zoom makes the little portable mixers. They're not recorders like these. They're like really small sound mixer boards that you would use at like a band or something like that. They're kind of sold so you can record your own band sessions, and so they have a recorder built in, so you could use it as a recorder. And a lot of them are advertised as having phantom power, but they only have like 2 ports with phantom power, and the rest of them don't have it. I don't know why they do that, but anyway, so yeah, I guess there are recorders that don't have that don't necessarily supply phantom power, but almost all the ones that I have do. So the reason it's called phantom power is because when they first came up with the XLR spec, the only microphones that existed were dynamic microphones. So there's not a separate power conductor on that cable. And what they've done is they've supplied power across two things that wouldn't normally have power on it, and a dynamic microphone wouldn't expect it to be there, but it doesn't hurt it. It just doesn't notice. That's why they call it phantom power. But a condenser microphone needs it if by some freak chance you happen to use a ribbon microphone, and you'll know it because it's expensive. You absolutely have to be careful never to apply phantom power on a ribbon microphone because it'll damage it. And I have blown up a recorder by plugging it into a mixer and sending phantom power to the mixer, which the mixer didn't need, and it didn't like it. And when I figured out that it was doing that, I turned it off and I was able to record. But then after that, I had this whistle in my recorder, so I had to send it in to be fixed. I don't know for sure, but I think that's what caused it. I mean, it started right after that. So you don't.
So you were taking the alt out from the mixer and trying to record to it?
This is record from it. So this was a live event. It was a burlesque show, and so they had the music and the microphones that the performers were using all going through this mixer. And instead of recording from the microphone, or in addition, I brought in my recorder and plugged it into the mixer. And he gave an output of the sound, and I recorded that. Because I was sending it phantom power, it conflicted.
Oh, okay.
I know they're supposed to be really delicate. Isn't the only place we'd come across a ribbon microphone be like in the recording booth?
Yeah, they're typically used for recording music in a studio. Sometimes recording vocals in a studio. They are very fragile typically, although modern ones are a little better. It would be almost unheard of to have one at a live music event, although I've seen people recommend them in some cases.
But I mean, we'll probably never come across one doing what
in
we
film, right? I never do, but I mean, you never know what weird situations you have. You might be recording a spelling bee or something, and they want you to use
all kinds of crazy stuff.
SM58s or something, which were not ribbon microphones, but
I was gonna say.
but you might have some filmmakers that want you to record.
You get some insane director that's just like a
Yeah.
maniac.
Aren't they all?
Oh.
Yeah, they are. So I'm just mentioning it because if you ruin a ribbon
Oh,
mic,
yeah, they're
it'll hurt your
expensive.
pocketbook. All right, so this is the most important part of this session. Actually, it's not so much that you're going to learn a lot that's important, but microphone placement itself is the thing that has the most impact on the audio quality, the sound that you get for film. So closer is better, and the reason that closer is better has to do with that inverse square law that we were talking about earlier. If you can get the microphone closer to the source, that means you can turn it down, and that means you're turning down the background noise. So the closer you are to the source, the more pure your recording is of the source itself and not other things. So if you put a microphone on the camera, I mean, your camera has a microphone, but if you get it, you go out and buy yourself a Rode VideoMic Pro, which is a shotgun microphone with a little 1/8" jack that you plug into your camera. it's a decent microphone and it's very directional. So it's getting out, it's getting the subject, and it's rejecting a lot of the off-axis background noise, but it's still nowhere near as good as having the microphone really close to the actor. So I don't know if I'm going to give the reasons why later, so I'll talk about it now. So the boom microphone is going to give you the most natural sound. Remember I was saying earlier that a little bit of room reverb is normal. It is expected. And if you have a microphone above the actor, close to the actor, but pointing down at the floor, you're going to get a little bit of reflection off the floor, and that's just like the perfect amount of reverb to have in your recording. So without doing any work, if you could point your microphone down at the floor near your actor, you're getting a little bit of reverb, but not a lot, and that's just the right amount. And part of the reason that's just the right amount is because all the other films that you've watched and television shows that you've watched for your entire life, that's the technique that they've generally used, and that's how much reverb they've had in those things. So that's what you're used to, that's what audiences are accustomed to, is just that little bit. And so that's what you're going to get with a boom that you're not going to get in any other way. If you have an on-camera microphone, you're getting, a lot of the wall behind them or something like that, some of the floor, some of the ceiling. If you put a lavalier microphone on them, you're close to the speaker's mouth, but there's no surface within its range that is giving you a little bit of reverb. So a lavalier actually has kind of a deficiency of reverb. A plant mic is usually pretty far away. So the boom is going to give you the most natural sounding balance of reverb. So a lavalier sounds easy and sensible because you just install it on the actor and then you're done. But the reality is you're not done, because when the actor turns his head, he's turning away from the microphone, and that reduces the signal. A lavalier is difficult to install so that in a way that's hidden and doesn't have clothing rustling. It's also muffled by the clothing in a lot of cases. And also the lavalier microphone, because it's so small, it's actually just not as good of a microphone. It doesn't get a lot of bass. And one of the cool things about this particular lavalier microphone is instead of having a teeny tiny little round diaphragm that's the diameter of the microphone, it's got this channel with a slanted diagonal diaphragm, so it's actually larger than most lavalier microphones are. So it gets more bass, and it's just more sensitive in general. But the full range of sound that you're going to get from a little bit larger microphone, like what you're going to put on a boom, is a lot better than what you're going to get in a lavalier microphone. And also, there's going to be more self-noise, hiss, in the microphone because it's small. So as the location sound recordist, you're often going to get prompts from the director or the DP or somebody saying, well, why can't you just put a lavalier on them? And the answer is you can, but you're not going to get as good of a result if you do. So you want to either avoid it, or you want to do it but don't rely on it. Also continue using the boom if you can. But sometimes there's just shots where you just have to do it. I mean, you have a super wide shot, right? There's two people on a sidewalk in front of a building and you want the whole building in the shot. There's no way you can get a boom in there without being seen. So you got to do it. And so there's cases for it when it makes sense. There's, you know, some things. If you guys all seen the Les Mis from the one with Hugh Jackman and okay, they recorded like 2/3 of that through microphones, just exactly this model, and singing and everything, and it was a, you know, kind of a semi-live sort of situation, and it just it made some sense. But in a film where you have some control, you should try to avoid it if at all possible. It really should be considered a last resort.
I got a question.
Mhm.
That microphone, what does it mean when that light starts flashing?
Yeah. Flash.
I
Does
think
that
it-
mean your battery's running low?
I don't think so.
You clipped. Gotta quit screaming.
I'll have to read the manual and get back to you.
You
on
shouldn't
that.
be using that mic, I think.
It's not the microphone; it's the recorder.
Just recording.
It wasn't flashing,
Yeah.
I don't know, 5 minutes ago, it wasn't.
I mean, it might be trying to tell me that the battery's
Is there
getting
any
low.
chance that's a bomb?
Any chance
No.
that's a what?
It's a bomb.
What's a bomb?
The numbers aren't moving. Did I pause it? Has it got a pause
There's,
function?
there's a self-destruct switch.
It does have a pause function. I hope I haven't missed a bunch of my film. All right, so there's a thing on this recorder that I probably should have used, which is a hold. So now none of the buttons will do anything. Wow. Wonder how much of that I missed.
I will say, while we're paused, I will say.
We're not paused anymore.
When I'm on set with like any of the bigger things, they use lapel mics. I know Michael's against them, but they use the lapel mics a lot. Just saying that out loud.
I'm going to say yes, but I would think that they're not exclusively using them. They're using
not.
them.
They're not.
They're
They
using
usually
them
have
as
a
a
boom,
backup.
and
Yeah.
They use them as a backup. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was describing that we used to do.
And if you have that option, it's a good thing to do. But you shouldn't rely on it unless you have to. And also, these things are expensive. So the radios, these two radios and this microphone, this is a $630 set. And if I buy a good microphone, it brings it up to $1,000 per. So if I have to wire up 4 actors, that's
Those are-
$4,000.
These are 600 per unit, right? Per sender and receiver.
The set together.
You got these for $300 each?
The set, 620. That's the standard price
Really?
for that. But you know, if you want electrosonic, they're $4,000 a set.
I thought these Sennheisers were like $600 for both units. I thought they were.
If you buy them separately, they cost a little bit more, but I don't think they're that much.
Oh, okay, cool.
So if you say you've got 4 people wired up, they each have their own SD card or memory?
No, so this recorder is not really the normal solution that filmmakers use, and the reason is I can't listen to this. I mean, I could plug in a headphone, but a sound guy couldn't do it out of frame. So normally, how this works is that you have the body pack transmitter on the actor, and then this goes in your recording bag, your recorder bag. So this bag has a big opening here specifically so that you can stuff a few of these in here. And so then there's a cable that goes from here into the XLR input on the recorder.
So it's all in one spot, so the editor doesn't have to go through 4 different, try to match that up.
Right. So the recorder will record. I normally record them on separate tracks, but there is the option to mix them together, combine them together on a single track or a stereo track. If you make them separate tracks, they're all in sync, but then the editor has the option of adjusting the level on one or the other, or cut out the noisy lavalier that's making all kinds of rustling sound.
This is one unit. One's a sender, one's a receiver.
right?
Yeah. I thought they were both transmitters. I thought you had two transmitters here.
No.
You don't. I
No.
see. Yeah, so I was wrong.
Plant mic in cars. So you're gonna do films where people are having conversations in cars. There's kind of two schools of thought on that. One is to put a lavalier microphone on the actors. Keep in mind that when they're talking, they're generally turning toward each other. So instead of having the microphone in the center, you're probably going to put it on the right-hand side on the driver and on the left-hand side on the passenger. You got to watch out for seat belts, shoulder belts. But I get good results putting them up on like the headliner or the sun visor. And I actually have a microphone that I own specifically for that purpose because it's really great at it. But a lot of people just use lavalier microphones and put it in that position. This microphone it's a lot bigger than a lavalier microphone, so all those problems I was talking about earlier about not getting all the low frequency sounds and having more hiss and is not as sensitive, this eliminates all those problems. So you stick this up, usually up on the headliner, in front of the actor. If you've only got one for two actors, you try to put it in the middle. And you just got to make sure that the camera crew is going to keep that out of frame. I lent this microphone to somebody who did a film, recorded some dialogue in a car, and everybody gave him trouble about his mic being in the shot. Only it wasn't his mic. The microphone, the car had a Bluetooth hands-free set in there, so it had its own microphone in there. And so he did it right. He didn't get his microphone in the shot, but everyone who watched it thought he did. So
Should you ever put that on a heavy metal swinging door?
not if you value your hearing.
Okay.
Oh, Randy doesn't know that story.
I don't.
Well,
Well, you know the ending.
What's the ending?
Don't put it on a heavy metal swinging door.
I do know the ending. Let me ask you, the group. I think this is a good room to ask this. I've tried to do some stuff in cars while they're moving, and I had a lot of trouble with engine noise and road noise and stuff like this.
Mhm.
Anybody got anything? Is there some software that's better than others about taking that stuff out? Anybody know?
So do you want to know what the professionals do?
I do.
They put the car on a trailer and tow it. And the trailer is usually large enough to accommodate the camera on the outside, and so
Okay. But they don't do that in Cash Cab.
what's cash cab?
Cash Cab's a show where the guy drives a cab around in New York City. And what's that? My wife likes to watch a show called Fixer Upper, where
Okay.
there's a couple that they have these bits where they're in the car driving around, and I doubt that those.
I was
are
just
on-
watching a YouTube video of the sound guy there's this new series called Comedians in Cars or something like that. And so he was talking about how he does all that
Yeah,
stuff.
comedians in cars.
Yeah, they're not on a trailer. That's
No.
a good point.
They're not. So
Anybody? Daniel,
does
How to do cars?
how to take that sound out?
Well, here's
you're never taking.
yeah,
You should assume that you will never be able to take noise out of the
These
audio
are
and software.
pretty quiet.
Okay, so first of all, some cars are noisier than others.
Okay.
If you're having a problem with that, go find a newer car. The insulation that's in cars that breaks down over time, and the cars actually get louder. It's not just because they're older models.
Okay.
So that's one thing. The road noise you can control somewhat by going slower.
Okay.
So typically in film they're not going 50 miles an hour; they're going 20 or 30. Unless you're, what's his name?
Steve McQueen.
No, I was thinking of Kill Bill,
Quentin Tarantino.
Quentin Tarantino. You,
Okay.
you,
Well, here's a question, is that the microphone, when you're in a moving car, do you think the microphone is picking up a lot of that noise naturally from the air, or is it because it's actually attached to the car which is shaking? So,
I think it's actually because the car is actually that loud, and it's that loud in the interior of the car.
so like a shock mount between the microphone and the car.
Probably not. I mean, you should mount it somewhere where it's not like transmitting a lot of that stuff. You shouldn't like glue it to the metal frame of the roof, but
Unless you're insane.
unless you're insane. But yeah, I mean that's a point. But I think most of the time it's clipped to the visor or clipped to the stuck to the headliner, and that provides a fair amount of insulation from it.
Because you were talking lavaliers, and so
Right.
you're cutting out a lot of noise that is around here. And so that
Yeah.
would be the engine, which is a couple feet in front of whoever.
A car is a noisy environment. I mean, how many watts are on your home stereo versus in your car stereo? Your car stereo has to be a lot more powerful so you can hear it because your car's so loud. It's just the noise floor in a car is ridiculous. But
they're doing it. I mean,
They're doing it.
They're doing something to take that noise out because, like somebody said, comedians in cars getting coffee. It's great audio.
But I guarantee you, none of them are driving a commercial truck. They're
But
driving.
they're driving old cars.
Yeah, and
They're old
open top
cars.
cars. I understand.
Yeah, yeah.
The guy, I watched that YouTube video. He doesn't normally put it up high. He normally puts it down low on the dash. He
Really good mics, and they put music over it.
they're not. I mean,
Good
he
engineers.
was using this mic specifically, so it's somewhat directional, but not that much. There are people who use more directional microphones. DPA was making basically a teeny tiny little shotgun microphone that with a clip was really great for that. If you could point it at the actor, and it would reject some of the sound. But honestly, number one, put it on a trailer. Number two, get a quieter car.
Go slow.
Yeah.
So you do old Hollywood to the green screen and have stuff go past the walls.
Rear screen projector.
So on-camera microphone, people do it, and I've actually gotten halfway decent results at it, but it's only in certain situations, right? I wouldn't have intimate dialogue recorded that way, but if you're doing an action scene, it's probably okay, especially if you're doing it outdoors where you're not having a big wall behind you that's reflecting a lot of stuff. Those are the kinds of situations that have been okay for me. But generally, if you've got a sound guy, then you're not going to do it that way. What am I looking for? My clicker.
Is that Mr. Bean?
That is Mr. Bean. So we're going to come back to our inverse square law. So we've got this microphone a foot away from his mouth, and that's where you want it, by the way. You want it pointed at his mouth. Versus an on-camera microphone, if he's just 10 feet away, which a lot of times he's even farther than that, if he's 10 times as far away, that means it's 1/100th as loud. But your room reverb and your background noise doesn't really change based on where you've placed the microphone. So your ability to compete with that is much better if you're closer. You understand the numbers? You like the numbers, right?
Ed, weren't we just talking about the same thing that was 40?
No, because it's 10 feet squared, 100 times.
If this is
Slightly
one, if
different.
this is 1 foot and this is 10 feet,
As long as your
that
units are the same, that could be 1 meter versus 10 meters.
Right.
yeah.
No, we were joking that you wanted two twice as loud, and so you get square root of 2. It's not an
Yeah.
Your 4s and your 9s, your 16s, your 25s. Those give you your integers that we talked about earlier.
Alright.
Don't hold me in the world.
You're supposed to be good at math, right?
No.
Integers are nice because you probably want to write something like that down at some point. Like we had script supervisor on my terrible student film, which one or two of you have seen. They're in like 10 different locations, but having the exact same conversation. So we measured the distance of the camera from person to person, distance of the microphone to person, to have that be the same to match cut. Didn't work out that way, but that was
Yeah.
the
Okay,
idea.
did it work?
So are you at least making sense of these numbers? Okay.
Well, I see what he's saying. You say 100 times as loud versus 1/100 as loud.
Well, it's
It should be
no.
1 to 100.
Yeah, it's 1 to 100. So this is 100 times as loud as that, or this is 1/100th as loud as that.
Right. Yeah, you don't combine the two. It's like tipping after gratuities included.
Mr. Bean is getting old.
He must be. He's probably like your age now. Someone's gonna have to Google that. All right, so here's the basics of the boom. I probably should have put together one of these things so I could show this. But so you're striving to have the microphone placed as close to the actor's mouth as you can, but obviously you can't have the microphone showing in the shot. So you're gonna, we'll put this one on there. So you're gonna work with the camera operator, unless he's nice enough to have shared a screen with you to let you see what you're doing. But most of the time you're going to have to trust him or her to tell you that you're in the frame or you're out of the frame. So normally you're going to bring it down and then let the guy tell you that you're out. And when he tells you you're out, give yourself a little extra and then find a reference on the far wall or something that you can kind of keep that thing lined up, because it's hard to just kind of remember how high it is. You drift that down and then you ruin the shot, ruin the take. I talked earlier about using a foam windscreen. If you're gonna have to move the mic through the air, it's gonna create wind rumble. So put a windscreen on it. If you are outdoors, the foam windscreen is almost never enough. So that's why you have this crazy thing. So this is called a blimp. And it has its own shock mount or microphone suspension system. So you mount your microphone in here, you route your cable out, and the way this works is instead of the wind hitting the diaphragm of the microphone, it hits this. And technically there's a little bit of sound when it does that, but it's 2 inches away. And our inverse square law reminds us that 2 inches is pretty much infinitely farther away, infinitely less loud than wind rumble that's happening right on the diaphragm itself. And then you have this furry thing that you put on the outside, and that kind of slows the wind down gradually. And so instead of having wind making sound by running across this grill, it kind of quietly slows down. So these two things combined together is very effective. I've recorded audio in the moving vehicle. I was recording Foley sounds, basically car sounds, and I was riding in the back of my truck while my brother drove it, and we were going 30 miles an hour, and I couldn't hear any wind rumble. I probably could have gone far faster than that, but So this is a really effective combination, and I've, used it in some really windy days, and it's great. But it's not cheap. This is the one made by Rode, and it's like $300, and the ones made by Rycote are like $600 or $800. But if you're going to shoot outdoors, you're asking for trouble if you don't have something like that. There are some cheaper things that are that fit over the end. They're bigger than a phone windscreen. I have one downstairs. I haven't found it to be nearly as effective as that, but maybe a little better than the foam. We talked about handling noises earlier. I mean, it's the same thing. You're trying to avoid having movement of your hands on the boom. And if you're listening, you'll hear it and you'll know right away. Okay, so this close arm straight, what that means is the right way, the official right way to hold a boom microphone is to hold it up horizontally, and you're going to keep this arm straight, straighten your elbow, and you're going to use this arm to control the position of the thing. Not only does it give you a little better control, I mean, I got this pretty short, but if it's extended out, 9 feet, this only weighs a couple pounds, but that leverage really, it seems a little heavier. But you can hold this up longer than if you were doing something like this. Sometimes you can hold it like this. It's easier to hold it like this, but the problem is, even if your mic is out of the shot, your boom itself could be in the shot, in the corner or something like that. So it kind of depends on how tight it is. But if it's a really tight shot, you can get away with this sort of thing. But otherwise, you just have to get used to the idea that you're going to have to do this a lot. And apparently exercising your arms is good for this. But the reality is your arms are going to get tired not because you're using your muscles, but because the blood's running out of your arms. So you're going to need breaks. So we talked about the microphone itself appearing in the frame. That's going to be obvious. The camera operator should be watching for that. But what's less obvious is shadows that the microphone casts. So, right, I mean, if that's my light source and I'm holding it up here, there's this big shadow of my microphone against the far wall. And a lot.
Also one on that wall too, in case that's an issue.
Yeah. Usually have multiple light sources on a film. More often than not, the light sources are up higher and they're looking down, so that you're not going to see that on the wall so much. But what you are going to see is, if I have the microphone over an actor's head and there's a light directly over the actor, I've got a shadow on his face maybe, or something like that. And not only is the shape of the shadow maybe tell the audience that there's a microphone there, but if I move just a little bit, that means the shadow's moving, and it's really obvious then. But camera operator often doesn't watch for that. The people watching the monitor, if there is one, often aren't watching for that. So it's kind of up to you to be the first line of defense to watch for that. Another thing that people don't often look for is reflection. So if there's a window or a glass framed picture or a mirror on the wall somewhere, anywhere in the shot, or a shiny car, you gotta think about whether or not there's a reflection of you, not just your microphone, but your boom and your actual person could be visible to the camera in there. So you got to ask the camera operator to look for that specifically, because often they don't think about that themselves. And the reality is they should be thinking about that for everything, because they could be appearing in their reflection. All the lights around could be appearing. It's kind of difficult. Hence, Business is War taking 12 hours to shoot, because we shot it in a glass conference room. It was so we had 2 walls that were reflecting just about everything that we put in there. We had to be really had to work to make those not show up. Okay, so I'm shooting a shot, and it's a really tight frame. So I'm standing right here by the actor, and the main light is over there, and I'm wearing a bright green t-shirt. The result is going to be that this side of Randy's face has got a little bit of green on him because I'm kind of like a secondary light source and I'm green. So I really try to not wear bright green t-shirts on film sets. The microphone or the boom operator is going to be the person closest to the actors in a lot of the shots, most of the shots. And so that's the person that's most likely to be an issue for so I try to wear black or gray t-shirts. Where's my clicker? I keep putting it down. All right, so we talked about a lot of this, some of this. So remember I said that you want some room reverb, and like the perfect amount is how much you get when you have the microphone pointing down at the floor, and you get a little bit of reverb off the floor. So you're gonna face challenges of where am I gonna put this microphone where it's not in the frame, and it's not casting a shadow, and it's not being reflected in the glass wall. And inevitably, someone is going to say, well, just put it under, which is called scooping, right? So there's a lot of times that will solve all of those problems, but it creates a different problem, which is that my reverb is changed now. I'm no longer getting my voice coming up off the floor. I'm probably getting some of my voice coming up off the ceiling. Which is going to be a different distance and a different material. So it may be about the right amount of reverb, but it's going to sound different from the other shots that you've done. So sometimes you have to do it, but depending on the situation, it may make a noticeable difference. And so I try pretty hard to not do it. Okay, so the last 2 points are about shotgun microphones. So the shotgun microphone uses this long tube called an interference tube. And the purpose of that is to cancel out sound that comes off axis. And it does it because the sound comes from both directions at the same time. It reaches the diaphragm, which is up here at the front, at the same time. And the problem is that this design works great in open space, but if you put it near a wall, now you have reflections coming from other directions, and it defeats this interference tube design. Or if you have it up close to a ceiling, which is going to be most of the time in a building, in a room where you're taking dialogue indoors, you're going to have it pretty close to the ceiling. So that reflection up there is going to basically defeat the off-axis rejection.
You've said it a few times, but when I did one of my first films, I put it right next to an air conditioning vent, and the sound was terrible. So
Yep.
don't make that mistake.
You gotta listen for that, and you may actually get wind rumble from that, but at the very least you're going to hear the vent. It's going to be really loud. So that's again, you got to be listening for that stuff. But anyways, so these things with the reflections are kind of a vulnerability of shotgun microphones, which is why they're not the best solution indoors. I know I told you if you're going to have one microphone, it should be a shotgun, and that's true. But you should probably have two microphones. One of them is not a shotgun. So you should have a hypercardioid or a supercardioid microphone, which is why I normally use this microphone indoors. So this is not a shotgun. It does not have an interference tube. and it is not defeated by flat objects nearby, flat surfaces nearby. Questions?
Why not use a hypercardioid outside?
Well, you don't need to use the hyper. You can use a hypercardioid outside, but now outside you have more noise. You have neighbors and you have wind in the trees. Your windscreen doesn't stop the sound that the trees make when the wind blows through the trees. And you have birds, and you have people mowing the lawn, and you have airplanes, and you have traffic. And even if your traffic isn't your street, you're still hearing it. So there's a lot more noise outside, and so the shotgun rejects more of that. So the shotgun is a better choice outdoors. But if if all you have is this microphone, you can do it, but you're going to hear more background sound. Okay, so we talked about a lot of this already. So the number one rule about the lavalier for film is that it has to be hidden. If you're doing, interviews, it's a lot of times acceptable to have a visible lavalier mic, but for a film, it would totally ruin it. So you have to be able to hide it, and that's maybe not so difficult until you realize that you have to hide it in a way that doesn't create any other noises, right? If I stick this under my shirt and then my shirt moves, it's going to make noise, especially if it's actually rubbing against the microphone. And depending on what clothing I'm wearing, it's going to muffle the sound. We watched a film, was it last night, that had two people outdoors in coats, and their whole film I think they used lavaliers for, and there was a lot of clothing rustling, and then when they were outdoors in coats, it was so muffled you could barely tell what they were saying. So all of these things are challenging. And also when you place it on them, you have to you have to choose a place for that shot so that all of the directions that they're going to turn their head are within range of the microphone. So if they're going to be turning over their shoulder to talk to somebody behind them, you may not want the microphone in the middle. You may want it over on the side. Sometimes you'll be lucky and you can hide it in a way that's attached to their head. I've hidden microphones in people's hair. Hats are an option if you've got a character wearing a hat. Glasses are an option, but they're not too common. And not everyone's hair can hide a microphone. Mine can't.
Is it, I'm sure there's better ways to do it, but would it be possible to use multiple lavaliers, like one here, one on your left, one on your right, that way no matter what?
That is a possibility, but that's money, right? That's $1,000 a shot, plus you got to have an open port on your recorder. And
The Impractical Jokers is a TV show, and they walk around with coffee cups, and it's in there.
They always have to be.
Yeah, they're always like
Awkward
interviewing
and
strangers.
drinking their
Yep, and they're like, "Oh, so where are you from?"
Probably like, it's probably
I'm
where,
not offering you coffee.
it's probably where
That sounds
Julian,
a little weird though.
he always had his Jack and Coke or something in his hand.
There's always the red solo cups. Those party scenes.
Yeah.
The empty solo cups.
so I'm going to mention one thing that I don't think I have in my slide, which is that because the microphone has a different frequency response from the boom microphone, And because the microphone could be muffled by the clothing, it's the sound editor's job to EQ that microphone to try to match it. And I mention that because in Business is War, I could totally tell which ones were from the lavalier and which ones were for the boom.
We had a lot of clothing.
There
Yeah,
was a
we
lot of
should-
clothing, Russell.
I
I didn't have that on him right. I didn't do a good job of that.
looking at the film, we probably should have ADR'd it because we didn't get it because of the clothing. But there was just I knew it was diminishing return the more I tinkered with that audio, because I probably should have spent more time EQing it, but we still had the clothing rustling. Yeah, you can tell.
So, yeah, so the normal thing, and of course this isn't the location sound recorder's job to do. It's the post-production people would do this, but ideally they would know what microphones you're using, and they would have a EQ profile to match them all. But then also, because it's under the clothing, it's cutting out certain frequencies, and so they would boost those frequencies in post to accommodate it.
And having it closer to your chest versus up here where more sounds kind of coming through your nose, you're getting different sounds from that.
Yep. And
even heartbeat.
and you get little or no reverb, so you might have to add a little reverb to match what you've been getting out of the boom. All right, so the lavalier microphones, some of them are what they call omnidirectional, which means they hear in every direction just as much. Some of them are directional, but they're not very directional. So you're going to hear more of a ratio between the actor's voice and the background sounds. I guess, yeah, we mentioned that they sound different. And yeah, I mean that if you're in a wide shot, you pretty much have to either ADR it or use a lavalier microphone, or maybe a plant microphone if you're lucky. So the reason that lavaliers are usually used with a radio is because obviously you wouldn't want to have a wire trailing off, especially if they have to move and they're trailing an XLR cable off their shoe or something. So normally you use a radio with it, which makes the whole thing more expensive. And you may have, issues with radio interference, especially if you've got a fair amount of distance. Or if you're in a car, people sometimes will use the radios with the car and try to receive it outside the car. And depending on how far away you are from the car and how much metal's in the car, that could interfere a lot. So you have a whole new set of issues with the radio. I've had pretty good luck with these, but I haven't really pushed them with distance, and I've only ever used 2 at a time. And so requiring practice, I definitely need to practice more. It's kind of an art to find ways to mount the microphone somewhere where there's not clothing rustle, and it's not muffled too much, and it's gonna vary with every different type of piece of clothing. The strategy for a t-shirt isn't gonna be the same as a strategy for a blazer, as a big fluffy winter coat. All of these things are going to be different. So I'm not going to go into them, but there's dozens of different ways to mount them. I mean, I just have this clipped on, but they have things with what they call vampire taps. They're little teeth pins that stick through the clothing. There's a lot of things involving gaffer's tape, double-sided tape. I've got these little things here that are double-sided tape with a little layer of foam, and people use moleskin. People take tape and wad it up into a little triangle and then mount the microphone to that. There's just all kinds of things. There's special products specifically for different situations. There's one that's made for this microphone that lets you put the microphone in the knot of a necktie. So the more practice you can get with those different situations, the better your chances are of success. The issues with the clothing, Russell, someone with a lot more experience than me would have had no trouble with that, because he had a jacket with lapels, actual lapels on it. It should have been really easy to hide that underneath the lapel, but I tried it 3 times and couldn't get it right, so we had to go. So that's a weakness for me, and it's something that you got to invest time to practice on it.
Will we be lobbing the couple and save the date just for safety?
I think we probably should,
Okay.
but again, just for safety.
Just for safety, boom will be primary. I'm just checking this out.
So we talked about plant mics a little bit. A car is a good example where you have a microphone in the car, but you know, a lot of times a plant mic can work out well if you have, you know, a situation where the actors aren't moving much. You have people sitting at a little table at a restaurant. You can put a microphone in a plant on the table, or, you know, behind a salt shaker, and you know, a lot of times that can help you with a situation that you aren't able to get any other way.
Do you have a plant mic?
So a plant mic isn't a type of mic, it's a location. So I mean, you can put any microphone as long as it's somewhere you can hide it. The lavalier microphone is common to use as a plant mic because it's so small and easy to hide. I've used this as a plant mic a few times.
That's the one you use
This is-
for Love in All the Wrong Places, right?
Yep, this is the one that got a pitcher of water spilled on it. Still works.
That was the one
I'm glad it
that
wasn't.
movie.
I'm glad it was water and not soda or something. Yeah.
You probably get more tired with this,
That one adds a little more weight. Yep. Yep.
plus the mic, plus you're probably at a greater distance outdoors. Depends on the shot. That
No,
makes me
we
tired.
still tend to be pretty close most of the time, but yeah, it adds a little weight. Sometimes it's freezing fucking cold when I'm outside holding that.
Oh, okay.
When was the last time I used that? I know I used it in Love in All the Wrong Places. That was in January, and we shot outside, and it was really cold.
You didn't use this for the blue, Secrets in Blue?
We used that in Secrets in Blue. All the outdoor scenes we shot with that.
Well, not so cold.
What?
Not so cold then.
No, it wasn't cold then. It wasn't really a problem. I can give you model numbers of those things later.
Yeah, I got them right here.
Okay. I've used plant mics for picking up things that were not dialogue. A couple years ago, we did a thing where there was this little boy watching a horror film, and we set a mic behind the television so that we could record the sound of the film. Because it was an actual film, we wanted to have the sound in sync. We couldn't just, you know, take some sound somewhere, and you know, we got the sound characteristics of the little tiny speakers that are in televisions, and it sounded like a TV, and it was as easy as just setting a microphone behind the television and running a wire to the recorder.
So did you grab that audio and then not have it run in audio during your take?
No, we had it run audio during the tape. We actually, it was pretty quiet, but so the shot was over the shoulder of a little boy watching the television. So the TV and what was on the TV was in the shot, and the boy had, I don't know if he had dialogue, he was playing with cars, so we wanted to hear that. So I had the boom over the boy, and then I had a separate mic on its own track getting the sound from the TV. And because they were separate and each was close to their source, that meant that each track was primarily that sound. So the editor could adjust the level relative to each other however they wanted. And And so it didn't conflict with each other because they were synced together, they were recorded together, so they were in sync. And only 2 of you are here know about the door jam story. That's interesting.
So tell us about the door jam story.
So we were in the glass-walled conference room that was really hard to find places to put cameras and microphones and stuff without seeing reflections and shadows. And we were doing this shot where Liz would open up the door to the conference room, step in, and say a line. And she was saying it as she was coming in. It was important that she do that while she came in. And then she would step out and close the door. And so I was trying to get that with the boom. And the problem is that the light was directly behind the camera, basically. So the shadow of my microphone was on the door, which was even more obvious because the door moved, which meant the shadow moved. And so we couldn't find a way to put the microphone in there and get her dialogue as she was coming through the door. And then I thought, oh, I'll just put a plant mic on the door frame right out of the shot. It'd be in the perfect spot. It'd be right there by her as she's giving the line. But what I failed to consider is that when she closes the door, it hits the door jamb, which is directly connected to my microphone. It's not near the door jamb. It was on the door jamb. I went deaf the first time that happened because it was just so fucking loud. Because, I usually have the volume up pretty loud, and so loud is someone talking loud, and then the door slamming was just insane. So how many takes did we do?
9. I was thinking, so that was like the last shot, and we'd already been running 13 hours, and people were real
They're
tired and wanting to go. And I thought about it afterwards, and it's like, we just should have had someone out in the hall hold the door open. We could have used the boom and wouldn't have had any of these problems and done it in 1 or 2 takes. But it wasn't a problem I was considering. You can only
So anyway, be careful what you put your mic on because it could be really loud there. Where's my clicker? Where's my clicker? So if you're going to use an on-camera microphone, oh, there it is. Thank you. Make sure it's a shotgun microphone that's very directional. If you're using a DSLR, which has the little 1/8" consumer audio jack, there's a product from Rode called a Video Mic Pro. It's actually pretty good. It's a shotgun microphone that's made to mount on the camera on the top, on the hot shoe on the top. And it does a pretty good job. But like I said earlier, it kind of requires certain situation in order to work well. And if you're in a room like this trying to get dialogue, that's not the situation. So you need a set that's quiet, and you need a place that's not going to have a lot of reverb. Walls like this, it's going to pick up way more of that from that position than it would from a boom. And you can't have quiet dialogue. You can't have an actor sub-vocalizing things, which you could totally get with a boom microphone. You'll never get that right with an on-camera microphone because you're so far away. So it's really only good for dialogue where the actor's pretty loud anyway. So most cameras have microphones built into them. Well, cinema cameras probably mostly don't, but a DSLR has microphones. Camcorders have microphones. The ones that come with, generally speaking these days, are not directional enough to do what you want to do. They used to be, but I mean these Canons, the microphones are on the side, and they lie to you in the instructions that you can turn on a directional mode, but it's garbage. It doesn't work, and it should have been obvious based on their location and type of microphone. But anyway, so we were talking earlier about the XY microphones, which is what this configuration on the top of this recorder is called. If you put that on the camera, you're basically getting a really wide stereo image of the room. So not only do you hear all of the room reverb and background noise, but it's in stereo, which makes it even more obvious. So even though you can buy, DSLR filmmaker kits that mount that whole recorder on top of your camera, it looks cool. It looks like it ought to be great. It's not what you want. Don't do it. Oh, so this is a note for Jeff. I have had good results with that camera and that on-camera stereo shotgun microphone in wedding receptions, and I go around and interview people, and it's amazing. And it's not just background noise, but there's 100 people talking, and there's a DJ playing music, and it's really noisy and loud there, and it still cuts through that well enough that you can hear the people that are talking to the camera.
So if I have a station outside the reception area, I was debating using an overhead boom and just having that there and having someone sit down. But you think that might be unnecessary if I just have them? You think the distance you are, or?
Oh no! I would come to a table. They'd be sitting at one of these tables that are 6 or 8 feet around, and I would come to the edge of it, and I would be talking to someone on the opposite side of it, maybe as far as you are from me.
So 5 feet. Okay.
And it's loud, so they're talking louder than they would otherwise, so that helps. But yeah, I'm pretty close, and it's pretty directional. I mean, you can totally hear all that other stuff, but as long as you're able to hear and understand the person that's talking clearly, it's acceptable in that situation. It's
You're
not
talking about the Rode Video Mic Pro, that kind of thing on it? Or what are you talking about? Just
well, I was
shotgun?
talking about this one. This is a shotgun microphone. I mean, the Rode Video Mic Pro would do the same thing. It would probably be just as effective. This is it's an Audio-Technica AT4029, which is a stereo shotgun mic. It's XLR. It's not the little 1/8" jack. So you would have to have something to convert if you put that on a DSLR.
Yeah.
But that camera has XLR inputs, so it works well. But yeah, I would think the same thing would be true of a Video Mic Pro.
Those are like $150 or something, right? Something like that?
The Video Mic Pro?
I think so.
I don't remember. It's been so long since I got mine. They've got an updated version of it now. Okay, always get room tone, and I'm really guilty of this because it's so easy to forget about it, especially if you're an ADD audio guy, because no one is thinking about it, and to get room tone, you have to get everyone else to stop and not make noise for 45 seconds or so while you do it, and the perfect time to do that is the first thing, but I have explicitly asked for that and been told many times by directors, no, we'll do it later. And it's because the director themselves is so eager to do that for a shot. So I can understand that, but
Not all directors.
not all directors. but it's so easy to forget about it because I'm in the moment. You know, I'm focused on all the things that's going on too. So,
Was
for
it me?
no, it wasn't you. No, it wasn't you. Who was it? It's a couple people, and I don't remember anyone specifically. But anyway, so yeah, typically it happens last. But if you don't think about it, you know, especially if it's the last shot of the film, right? The martini shot and all that, people are excited to be done. They're cheering, and there's like, okay, now you have to stop cheering and be quiet for while I do this.
At one of the meetings, it was a director point, but sound people should be thinking about it, and it was, when you call rolling, which I'm sure you'll get to, you can do some long takes where you call rolling, and before you say action, you give it 30 seconds, and then you get your room tone, because sometimes the fans will kick on and off, and the room tone changes, so once a day might not save you.
Right. So yeah, I think I was going to try to mention that, but oh yeah, when conditions change. So you're shooting for 2 hours, and then an air conditioner that you didn't know existed kicks on, and it might be one that you either didn't notice until you got through a couple shots, or it could be that you have no control to stop it. It could be you're in Bridgeton and now all the planes are circling overhead. So so when that happens, you need to take room tone again, so that the editor has something to work with in both of those situations, for the shots that were done without that noise and the shots that were done with the noise. And if the editor's lucky, that won't be mixed up in the same shot or the same scene, because then they have to mix and match. It's hard. But if you give them room tone for the noisy situation, they can layer that in on top of the not noisy situations, and that helps. It's important to get room tone in every set, not just like every building. If I were to do a film in this house and I shot a scene here and I shot a scene there and I shot a scene there, those 3 places sound different. And so you need to get room tone in each one of them. The standard recommendation is to get 30 seconds. So the way that works is I'm going to start the recorder. I personally am going to say something to the microphone so that the editor knows what this is, because it's usually separate from the actual takes that we do for the scene. So I'm just going to say out loud that this is room tone for scene 5, and then I'm going to stop and be quiet. I'm going to start watching the counter. So by that point, I've gotten to like 10 seconds. So now I got to wait for the counter to get up to 40. But I'm still listening. So it might be that 5 more seconds in, someone slams the car door. If it's 5 seconds, then I'm going to start over and I'm going to wait till I get to 45. But if it's 20 seconds in and it was in the middle, there's not much practical. I mean, you're not going to start over every time. So, but ideally you want to get 30 seconds of clean room tone. Like I said, no one but you is thinking of it. If you've been doing a lot of collaboration with the director or the DP, you can ask them to add it to the shot list. But even that's not foolproof, because a lot of times people stop looking at the shot list. So, yeah, and like I said, if you can record that first, then not only do you have that out of the way, but you might be halfway through the scene and then you realize, oh, we never got room tone, and you could stop, interrupt, and say, hey, can we get room tone now? Or at the very least, you still might remember it to get it at the end. But yeah, if you put it at the beginning, you're more likely to remember sometime that you need to get room tone. And I gotta say, it's no fun being the sound guy and having to say something that interrupts everybody. It's like, hey, I need I need everyone to stop and do room tone, or I need to stop for 10 minutes while I put a lavalier on somebody, or while I go out to my truck to get some other microphone that's going to fix this problem. It's kind of an infamous thing where you're always waiting on the sound guy, which sucks if you're the sound guy. But anyway, so yeah, room tone is really important. Does everyone understand why room tone is important? Okay. So you've probably seen all this stuff done. Slating is obviously used to synchronize the picture with the sound, and also to get details about the take in case it's not logged well on paper. That recorder will record the scene and the track number as long as you're putting it in, but the smaller recorders don't do that. They're just numbered files. So you have to actually read off the scene and the take number so that someone listening to it can identify it. So we talked earlier about getting the slate operator to not slam the sticks when it's right by the microphone. So you just got to have that dialogue, and usually I forget until after he's done it the first time, but whatever. But the opposite is true too. If you have the slate really far away from the microphone and you told him an hour ago to do soft sticks, he's probably still doing soft sticks, and now he's so far away it's hard to hear it. So you got to also tell him, okay, go back to hitting it hard sticks, I guess.
Say it just like that too.
Well, we're definitely going to say it on Randy's sets.
Make sure no one's talking over the sticks too. Maybe a problem with that.
You know, and this is totally not the sound guy's problem, but as long as I'm talking about it. So here's the thing that I see people do a lot of time. They want to do it one-handed, which is fine, except that you have a lot less control over it. And a lot of times, instead of the top going down, the bottom goes up, or the whole thing, they'll like whip it and the whole thing jerks out of the frame. And here's the problem. By the time the sticks come together, all the sticks are out of the frame and not visible. And the sound editor can't see when they close, which is the whole point of using the thing. So you really need to make sure that the sticks are visible in the frame when they come down.
Unless you got reference sound on the camera.
Unless you have reference sound on the camera that you trust.
That I trust.
Hopefully they clap.
So yeah, so like I was saying, that recorder keeps track of the scene number and the take number. It automatically increments the take number for me, but that can be more trouble than it's worth because sometimes you get off track. Sometimes the slate operators skip the take that you didn't, they skipped the number. So you gotta make sure that you stay coordinated with the slate operator so that your recorder knows the same thing that the slate operator put on the slate.
Can you go over the order of every shot for people who might not know?
You mean the order of the shots, like master first?
No. So they say quiet on set.
Oh, I think maybe I didn't. Okay, so on a film set, when you have an assistant director, typically the assistant director is going to call out most of this stuff. So quiet on the set, which ideally you won't have to say every time, but a lot of times you do. And then it's normal to tell the sound recordist to roll sound before the camera, and that's because in the old days tape was cheaper than film. And today audio is smaller in size than the video is, so it still makes sense. So you call the assistant director calls roll sound and waits for the sound guy to say sound speeding, which a lot of times it just, both of those people will shortcut. He might just say sound and he'll say speed. And then roll camera. Camera operator will say camera speeding or some shorthand. And I think the assistant director is supposed to say something like ready, so that the director knows that it's his game now. And he's going to watch the actors and let them do their thing, wait for them to be settled. And then at his leisure, he's going to call action. And then eventually the director is going to call cut. No one else calls cut. No one else interrupts a scene or take. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but it doesn't matter if a plane crashed outside. It's not your job to interrupt the shot. You let the director call cut. Directors can forget to call cut. So you might have to ask, did we cut? Well, I'm going to talk a lot of this stuff later, I think. Yeah. I think I have a slide for most of this stuff.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, I think that's the normal order of calling the shots.
I remember the look on your face when I was doing it wrong. It was our first meeting, and you were like, "Oh man, what I walk on to."
Well,
I do it wrong all the time.
yeah, that happens. And even if you've been doing it for 3 hours, you still sometimes forget that you have to turn the camera on before you can call action.
Well, I didn't know it was first take. I didn't know. What
Right. Yeah. So. And you know what? I forgot part of it. I forgot. So, before you roll camera, someone puts the slate in front of the camera. So, if you're a actual 3-man camera crew, the second AC, he ought to know this, and he'll have it ready without being told. But frequently, it's the camera operator who will tell the second AC to put the slate in. It's the phrase is slate in, and oh yeah, I forgot a whole bunch of stuff. So slate in. And then the camera operator is going to have to, maybe give some suggestions about moving it so that it's in the right place. The camera has to have the sticks in frame, wants to have the scene and take numbers in frame. And ideally, that will be in position before he rolls camera so that the first frame has this information. So it's really easy to navigate through your video files and see the thumbnail, and you don't have to start playing it and wait for the thing to get in there. So even though somebody said slate in, that doesn't mean to read it and mark it yet, because after slate is in, then you roll camera, and then after the camera is rolling.
I'll trust you. I think we always did camera, slate, action.
I realize that, but that
That's
screws
not
up the fact that you want the slate in the first frame. You want the slate to be visible on the first frame of the video.
Okay.
I'll find you a webpage. There's multiple web pages about this very topic. So once the camera's rolling, you usually call mark, and that tells the slate operator that it's time to read the information off the slate, and then slap the sticks. You typically will read the production in like the first take, maybe for the whole first shot, but you don't usually have to read it every time. You're normally just interested in the scene and the take. And the scene number will have a number, but then for different shots, you usually do a letter. And it's common to use mnemonic alphabets instead of just A, B, C, because if you really have to listen to the audio to find it, it's easier to understand, to know that you've understood what letter it is. Oh, okay, so sometimes the slate operator or if it's the script supervisor, whoever's logging stuff, they may periodically ask for file names, file numbers. So that recorder, the file name is the scene and take number, but on that recorder, it's just a number. And so if you're trying to make it easier for the editor to match up files, if you periodically write down the number of the file in the shot log, so that this scene and take was this file on the camera and this file on the recorder, it'll be easier for the editor to find them later.
As an editor, it was amazing to see the audio the same name as the shot or video, and it would have been annoying to have a secondary source to go 1 and
Yep.
2, 3, 4, 5.
So if you're on a really professionally run set, you'll have a data wrangler, or a, what do they call it now, a DTE, what?
Mid-DAT?
D8, yeah. DIT.
Don't know what it stands for. That's it.
Anyway,
Give
so
yourself ticket.
so it's the guy who is sitting on the set. He takes the cards from the camera and the audio guy periodically, and he starts dumping them in there. And while they're continuing to shoot, he's filling in a lot of those details, matching up. This file name is this scene and take number, and he's probably going ahead and syncing the sound and the picture together, so you have all that stuff synced, maybe only for the ones that have been selected in the shot log, or maybe all of them, so that by the time the editor gets it, all of that work is done already. And at the same time, you have dailies ready if you need to look at them, because that guy has them on his laptop or whatever.
We need
So,
that,
It's
but outside
it's,
not gonna happen.
right. So I mean,
That's what I was doing in the back room for Sequence on Blue.
well, you were building a whole. You were.
No, that until we were pretty much leaving, that's all I was doing.
I see.
But
Yeah.
it saved a lot of time. I also didn't write it down.
There you go.
Oh, calling the shots. So the AD or the director will call roll sound. Verify the. Oh yeah. So before you say sound is speeding or sound speeds, you should actually look at your recorder to make sure that it really is. Because if you forgot to stop the last one and you hit a button again, you might be stopping it rather than starting it. I've had recorders that you just have to hit the button with a certain amount of force before it'll actually start recording. So some recorders will turn on a red light when it's recording, but a lot of times you just have to watch the numbers to make sure the numbers are moving.
Right, that's another mistake that I've made more than once. If you get it and you hit record, the first time you hit record, it just it's doing levels.
Yep.
And I have made the mistake thinking, oh, it's recording. You got to hit it the second time and make sure those numbers are scrolling,
Yep.
or else you're not recording.
Yep.
For safety, you need to give people the ability to cut. At least on my sets, I'm fine with that.
To cut?
To
To
cut.
cut, because for safety, in terms of someone's coming at you or a car's coming at you, if no one's gonna call cut because they're so scared,
Okay.
they're like, oh, maybe the car won't hit. I don't want that any, and that almost happened to me. So that's why I say that.
DiCaprio cut his hand. Coming at us with this.
Well, he knew he was gonna still be fine, but I'm saying, like, we were shooting something on the street and there was a car coming and someone didn't want to tell me because they were so scared to call cut, and I wish they had, because that wouldn't have been worth it.
How about look out?
All right, that's fair.
If you're Randy, you want.
Okay. I mean,
That makes some of the best footage.
I don't think I want to be working on any of your sets if we're shooting in the middle of the street.
I'm not shooting in the middle of the street anymore.
Anymore. But okay, so that's a valid point. But I think the real point that I'm trying to make here is that there's a lot of people on the set who can easily notice that something went wrong, and the director probably noticed it too, but there are good reasons why you might want to keep going even though that happened. One might be that, okay, so there was a car door in this part of the take, but you might still be able to use the second part of the take. One might be that you're really trying to coax an emotional performance out of an actor and you don't want to break them out of the moment. So whatever those reasons are, it's usually, life and death situations aside,
Yeah.
it's usually better to err on the side of caution and just wait through the entire take, even though you know that it's probably not usable.
And I had an actress calling cut, and that was very bad. Even you get one to learn the rules on the set, but she called it like 3 or 4 times, and that's a big no-no.
They don't realize I can cut around them.
Don't worry about it.
That's one upside to stage actors. They know they have to keep going.
Yeah.
That's another thing is the actors and sometimes the directors too, they give up too easily. The actors, they stumble over their line and they'll stop and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry." I know this class isn't for actors, but yeah, you should totally keep going if you can. And directors, we get 3 seconds into a take and there's a problem. He knows he needs to stop this so that he can give some direction, but there's all this setup time in stopping and starting the takes. In a lot of cases, it's a lot more efficient if you call reset and don't call cut, so that you can keep rolling and then start from the beginning again. But this is a sound guy class, so. Okay, so the tail slate thing. Does everybody know what tail slate means? All right, so if either you forget to slate the take at the beginning, someone will notice that, hopefully before they've actually called action and say tail slate, or everyone has to silently pay attention to that. Ideally, the AD will silently pay attention to that. So when they get to the end, hopefully they won't call cut. Instead, they'll call tail slate, which means to bring the slate in, and you normally hold it upside down in front of there, and then you mark it. But sometimes the director will forget. Usually everyone will forget. Ideally, someone will jump in right away and countermand the order to cut and say, nope, tail slate, and then they'll do it. But it's such a habit to press the button every time you say cut. It usually doesn't work out. So sometimes the other valid reason for tail slating is when you've got some kind of shot where you have to start it in a position that there's just no way to put the slate in front of the camera. Doesn't happen very often, but it's possible sometimes. But so then you pretty much have to tail slate each take. But you have to remember, it's so easy to forget and then cut, and then you have to sync it some other way.
I will say there's pretty much no situation where you have to do both.
Yeah.
And if someone is trying to convince you there is, it's because they used to work with film. Physical celluloid.
Mm.
You don't.
Go back
So here's a thing that only the sound guy seems to to realize, and that is, no one has told the sound guy what the shot is, right? They're gonna set up the camera in a position to get this shot and put the lights around it, and the lighting and camera crew get told this information, and they work on it for half an hour, and the director's working with the actors, and finally they're about ready to go, and the sound guy still doesn't know what the shot is because he hasn't seen it. And so there's details that the sound guy needs to know, like, where can I stand? How close can my mic be? Is somebody moving? Who in this shot am I putting my microphone near? And so ideally, you want to work with the AD or the director and say, okay, please explain to me what this shot is so that I can strategize my part of this, and so that I don't have to hold everyone up after they've just spent a half an hour. Everyone else is ready except you. So it's one of those sound guy things where everyone else is focused on something other than sound, and so it feels like you're being a troublemaker by asking them to explain it, but it's not something that's laid out in any way for them to read it. Even if you have a shot list, it's often the details that the sound guy needs is not captured on the shot list. So, and then, you know, it's one thing if you just have to know who you're booming and where you got to have the boom. It's another if you've got to do something that takes 10 minutes, like put a lavalier on somebody. It's like, oh, nobody told me until just now that this is a super wide shot. We have to have a lav, and that's going to be 10 minutes. Sound coverage. So most of the time you've got one mic and you're putting that near one actor, and you're gonna shoot the scene from different angles, and so each shot is a different angle, and you're gonna mainly focus on the dialogue for a specific actor, and you're gonna go through that for different angles until you've got everybody. It's the DP's job to make sure that we have video coverage of everything that needs to be done, but it's the sound guy's, it's not really supposed to be the sound guy's job, but in reality the sound guy needs to pay attention to, did I get each actor's dialogue in that scene? Because we do a close-up on Bob and we do a close-up on Mary, and then we do a wide shot where the only thing is I got a microphone way far away because it's a wide shot, that means I didn't get good dialogue on Betty. And so, you know, the crew may be ready to move on to the next scene, and you've got to pay attention and say, wait a second, we didn't get dialogue for Betty. And I don't think that's technically the sound guy's job to do, but I guarantee you that the sound guy is the only person who's thinking about it in the moment. The director and all of them probably considered this stuff in planning when they were designing the shots, but on the set, it's totally out of their mindset right now. So you will save the scene if you pay attention and make sure that you've got everyone's dialogue that's talking in that scene. All right, so for each shot, I mentioned just now, so you might have a shot that has 3 people in it, but you can only put the microphone near one of them. It's not really practical to try to put it in between people because you're farther away from both of them, and you're going to do wide shots and you're going to take audio, but that audio, because you're so far away, has got more background noise. So ideally you're going to get close-ups, singles of everybody, and it's not always obvious who is the person that you're getting the singles of for each shot, so you need to ask if you can't tell, and that's who you got to put the microphone on. Blocking. So you got to know how the actors are going to be moving in the scene, because I might just say, hey, this would be a great place for me to stand, and then they do the first take and someone wants to walk through you, or the camera turns and now you're in the shot, or the actor who's speaking dialogue is moving across the room and you got to follow them, but depending on where you're standing, you may not be able to do that. If they're moving from there to there, this is a great place for me, but if I decided to stand here and they're moving away from me, there's no way I'm going to do that without making noise with my boom, so or walking to follow them. So you can wait for the first take, but then the first take is wasted. So ideally you want to understand what the blocking is going to be before the first take. And same for the camera movement. A lot of the times the camera isn't moving, isn't changing its point of view. So you can ask to make sure that you're out of frame, and then sometimes the camera operator isn't going to tell you that, oh yeah, I'm tilting up. So you think you're safe, but then he tilts up and your microphone's in the shot. Or he's dollying out or zooming out or something like that. So you have to know that you're going to be out of the shot, not just at the beginning of the take, but through the entire shot. And being aware of the light. So we talked earlier about shadows. Your microphone is going to cast shadows on things. So you need to pay attention to where the lights are and where the subject is, and think about whether you're in between them, because if you are, then you're probably casting a shadow. Okay, so this is all about speaking up when there's issues, basically. So the director's sitting behind the monitor. He's watching the take. He has a pretty good idea that he likes what he saw, and he was listening directly of the actors, so he knows that he likes what he heard. But that doesn't mean that the recording was good, the audio. If there was a train that nobody heard, if there was, the camera, the actor stepped out away from the microphone for a half a second and you didn't get that part of their dialogue, you've got to make sure that the director knows that had a problem with the audio. And ideally, if someone's logging, then you need to make sure that somebody logs that, yeah, there was a problem with the audio in that take.
And don't be shy.
Don't be shy. And don't be shy means don't wait for the director to ask you, because a lot of times the director won't ask you. You have to jump in and say, oh yeah, all those things are great, except... and so I'm going to say we had a problem with the audio. That take was no good. 9 times out of 10, they're not going to just take you for your word. They want to know why. They want to know specifically what was at issue. And an important part of that is remembering what part of the line where it happened. So if there was a dog bark and it was in the middle of a line, and we get to the end of the take, he calls cut, and I say, oh, we had a dog barking. The director is going to be thinking about whether or not we can use most of that take anyway. The dog barking could have been on another actor's dialogue that we're not even using for that take. So a common question is, well, what part of the line did the dog bark happen? And if you say you don't know, then that's not very helpful. So when it happens, think about the words that are being said right at that moment and keep those in your head, so that when you get to the end of the take, you can say, there was a problem with the audio in this part of the line. The thing where, the actor moves away from the microphone often happens several times in a row. So, you might not have got good audio the first take, probably you'll get it the second take. But if it keeps happening, that means you've got a bunch of takes that are really good except for that one thing. So you've got to make sure that the director knows we can't move on yet. We got to get this. And sometimes you'll have to specifically ask for a change to the shot so that it's possible. For example, the guy is talking while he's getting up, or he's talking while he's putting on his jacket, and so you're not getting his dialogue because you can't keep up with him. It's too hard to keep up with him. Or he's saying a line while he's going through a doorway, which even if you don't get hit with the door and put a plant mic on the door, there's wind created by the door, and that creates a wind rumble. So anyway, so you may have to ask for the thing to be changed a little bit. Can he move and wait until after he's moved before he starts his line, or finish his line before he moves? Something like that. And 9 times out of 10, everybody's fine with that. So yeah, I mean, I guess I've said this before. If you've done a bunch of takes and none of them were good sound-wise, you got to make sure that they know before you move on. Questions yet?
I got 7 minutes. I don't know if
You got to move through? We're pretty close.
All right.
Yeah. All right, so I was hoping to have some time for hands-on. So I intended to record this video using a lavalier microphone on a Zoom F1 recorder, which is a belt-worn digital recorder. And I haven't had it for very long. And I made a mistake. The mistake is that I bumped buttons on the front of it while I was giving the session. So my recordings were interrupted. And the real mistake that I made is that there is a hold switch on the side, and that switch is intended to keep people from bumping buttons while they're wearing it and while it's recording. I knew full well what that switch was for. Several of the Zoom products have it, and occasionally I've used it. But usually I don't wear the thing, and it didn't really seem like something that I needed to set. But obviously I needed to use it, and from now on I'm going to use it every time. But so that's what happened. And so if you heard the sound change in the video, what you were hearing was me switching from the microphone on my chest, the lavalier microphone, to the shotgun microphone on my camcorder, which was 15 or 20 feet away. And I mean, that's a good microphone, but if you listen to the class, you understand now the difference in microphone placement between a lavalier and an on-camera microphone. And there was just a lot more room noise. The air conditioner had been turned on, and that was part of it. And the lavalier microphone isolated all of those things, but the on-camera microphone, because it was so far away, it couldn't really do that. So it actually turns out to be a really good example, a demonstration of the difference in sound that you're going to get with a close microphone like a boom or a lavalier versus an on-camera microphone. So I didn't really plan that demonstration, and I wish it hadn't worked out that way, but anyway, that's what happened. So you'll in the video, the sound fades from one to the other so that it's not quite so abrupt, but that's what happened. I bumped buttons on the recorder and it stopped recording. And I had to use other audio even though it wasn't the best audio. So that's what happened, and I certainly learned something, and I hope you'll learn from my mistake.